Chapter 435. In a secret cave somewhere, Rick and Wooming sat opposite each other. In front of them was a map that was larger than an ordinary one. On the map were chess pieces carved from crystals of different colors. These chess pieces represented the various races. Now, there were no more chess pieces representing the various races on the Lucia continent on the map. In other words, the major races had already withdrawn from the Lucia continent. There were basically no large races left on the continent where humans were. In that case, the first step is complete, Wooming said calmly. The goal of not letting the continent where humans were located become a battlefield had been achieved. The battlefield on the Yar-Ala continent has also been formed. Rick smiled as if everything was under his control. In the southeast of the Yar continent, there were chess pieces representing the forest elves, fairy elves, and dragon elves. The forest elves entered the southeast of the Yar continent through the southern part of the Lucia continent and pulled out the fairy elves, who had retired from their hidden nests, to join the forest elves alliance. With the idea that the enemy of their enemy was their friend, the forest elves pulled in the dragon elves, who were at odds with the goblins. However, there were very few dragon elves. The three forces were entrenched in the southeast of the Yar-Ala continent, led by the forest elves. In the northeast of the Yar-Ala continent, there were chess pieces representing the goblins, giants, and fantasy breed. The goblins were originally entrenched in the northwest of the Lucia continent. Due to Wooming's attack and the orcs' discovery of their secret weapon, Marrow Explosion, the goblin fleet had no choice but to set sail to the northwest of the Yar-Ala continent. As the giants had always been on good terms with the goblins, the two quickly began to form an alliance. The fantasy breeds joined because the goblins exposed the forest elves' magic technique, the Zeroth Ward of the Void, to the fantasy breeds. The Zeroth Ward of the Void, which was based on controlling the self-destruction of fantasy breeds, was something that the fantasy breeds hated. Therefore, the fantasy breeds joined the goblins' alliance. However, fantasy breeds were rare to begin with, so the forest elves and goblins were currently evenly matched. In addition to these three forces, there was also the native force of the Yar-Ala continent, Artheus, and the Skywing species under his command. The Skywing species occupied the body of a huge fantasy breed called Abantiheim. This fantasy breed was an apostle subdued by the god of war, Arthas. It had followed Arthas since ancient times, acting as a gathering place for the Skywing species under his command. This third force seemed to have very few people. It consisted of Arthas, Skywing breeds, and a fantasy breed. However, even without Arthas, the Skywing breeds were still extremely powerful existences. Aside from the Skywings, there were very few other life forms, such as fantasy breeds, dragon breeds, and giant breeds. These life forms basically did not have a fixed gathering place, and even if they moved together, there would not be more than a dozen of them. As for the Skywings, because they had a gathering place, they would basically move out in groups and hunt for heads. It could be said that no one was willing to provoke the Skywings. That was why the forest goblins and goblins were on Lucia and not Yar-Ala. However, war was a collective battle, so the Skywings might be slightly weaker. However, the Skywings still had a powerful ability that they could use as a group: Skystrike. The old capital of the forest goblins, Marilon, was destroyed by a Skywing's Skystrike. If Arthas was included, then it would be impossible to calculate. In this world, the gods were born from the Elven Corridor, and the gods that were born had their own characteristics, concepts, and so on. The creations of the gods were often the same as the god. For example, the creator of the goblins, God Okan, had the title of God of Forging. The goblins were also experts in the field of forging. The magic airships were the first to be researched by the goblins. The magic airships of the forest goblins were actually just using magic to make the warships fly, unlike the goblins' magic airships that used fuel ores as a power source. Canas was the god of the forest, and her creations were the elves that were close to the forest. As the god of wisdom, she could use 168 types of spells at the same time, which was the so-called 168 types of spellcasters. It should be known that the strongest of the forest goblins was the 8th type of spellcasters. That was how wise Canis was. As for the Kikai race, their god initially wanted to find someone to answer his questions, so he created 5 small machines. However, he realized that these 5 small machines could not answer his questions. Therefore, the god passed through his own spirit and died. Then, those 5 small machines developed into the current Kikai race. The god of war was naturally born from hatred, hostility, malice, blood, and other things related to war. That was why Arthas was crowned as the strongest. Therefore, the power of war was often terrifying, more terrifying than wisdom, forging, and so on. Meanwhile, the forest elves had developed the Zeroth Void Blessing, while the goblins had developed the Marrow Explosion. Both of them were confident in themselves, which was why Silent and Rick had pushed them to the Eliala continent to face off against the Skywings. Now, this could be considered the final war. That was because the remaining races basically all withdrew from the final war for their own reasons. The Sea Dwellers were not interested in the continent and did not want to participate in the war, so they lived in the deep sea. The Moon Song race had always lived on the huge red moon, standing aloof from worldly affairs. The vampires lost in the war and could not participate in the war. As for the demons, those things were actually just demons and monsters, so why would they care about the war? By the way, the beastmen fled directly from the sea. They were originally not far from the goblins, so when Rick and the others leaked the information about the Marrow Explosion, they quickly gathered their entire race and retreated from the sea. As for the Kikai race, they did not provoke others, and others did not provoke them, so they lived in peace. Coincidentally, almost all of these races were races whose gods had died. It was precisely because their gods had died that they chose to preserve themselves. After all, the prize of the war was for the gods, and they might not necessarily use it even if it was given to them. The 3 forces are already in their own positions and are on guard against each other. Now all we need is a catalyst, and the final war will begin. Then, Rick looked at Wuming. Wuming was such a catalyst. Then, there's no time to lose. Let's begin tonight, Wuming said with a nod. Then, Wuming directly entered his spatial door and left the cave. The future of humanity will be decided tonight. Chapter 436. The sun set and night fell. In the Yar Ayla continent, Wuming floated in the air as he looked at the massive creatures in the sky. Abendheim, the gnome fleet, and the forest elves' magic airship had all settled down peacefully, forming a tripartite balance of forces. Even so, Wuming was still only interested in Arthas. Wuming had learned from studying the forest elves' Zeroth Void Blessing that the technique had extremely high lethality, but it was fine if he couldn't hit it. As for the gnome's Marrow Explosion, Wuming estimated that it could match the Zeroth Void Blessing, but it was still the same. It was fine if he couldn't hit it. If it was just a defenseless Arthas, then the Zeroth Ward of the Void and Marrow Explosion might have been effective. However, against a group of Skywing species that could use Sky Strike, as well as Arthas behind the Skywing species, the forest goblins and goblins would have a hard time hitting their targets. However, Wuming didn't care if the forest elves and gnomes could kill the Godslayer, or if Arthas could defeat the 6 major races. These had nothing to do with Wuming. Wuming's goal had always been clear, and that was to help Rick and let the humans obtain victory with their own hands. That was all. In this way, the Kikai species that could replicate the techniques of other races would come in handy. After all, what better way to signal the start of a battle than when the enemy released their signature technique? However, Wuming only knew one Kikai species, and that was Zayubala's or Shiobi. However, Wuming didn't want Shiobi to participate in the battle. As Wuming had an avatar, he was very clear about Shiobi's current state. The human villagers' care and enthusiasm for Shiobi made Shiobi, who had long developed a desire to explore her heart, surge like a lake that had been opened. At present, Shiobi often had situations where data kept flowing in her eyes, her head heated up, and her body trembled as she said, "Error, error." Fortunately, Wuming's clone was there. Through Wuming's Lune runes and Yggdrasil, world tree, magic, the villagers didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. Even Crony, who hugged Shiobi to sleep almost every night and often bathed with him, didn't notice that Shiobi wasn't human. In addition, Wuming would guide her from time to time. Wuming believed that Shiobi had already obtained imperfect feelings. The reason was in Wuming's hands. "Thank you, Shiobi." Wuming took out a metal sphere and thanked Shiobi, who was far away on Lucia. The metal sphere in Wuming's hand was given to him by Zio. "Nameless needs this. I'll give it to you." Although Shiobi had feelings for him, she still had that submissive personality, although she liked it this way. "After all, we're siblings, aren't we?" Then, Shiobi handed the metal sphere to Wuming's clone. At that time, Wuming's clone looked at Shiobi with an indescribable gaze, but Shiobi only smiled. The clone believed that it was the most beautiful smile Wuming had ever seen in this world. Although it was a clone, the clone was still Wuming. Therefore, other than knowing that he was a clone, he was basically the real Wuming. Therefore, Wuming's clone accepted Shiobi's gift and patted her head. "Thank you, Shiobi." In order to let Shiobi stay here with peace of mind, Wuming's clone accepted the metal sphere and immediately used a teleportation door to transfer the metal sphere to Wuming's hand. He also explained to Shiobi the truth that he was a clone. Shiobi didn't feel depressed. Even if you're a clone, your love for Shiobi isn't any less than your main body. This made Wu Ming's doppelganger extremely touched. "We can't disappoint the young lady's kind intentions." At this moment, Wu Ming said as he injected magic into the metal ball. Although it wasn't Wu Ming's special ability allowed devil power to use these devices that relied on power. In an instant, the metal sphere turned into a simple armor and stuck tightly to Wu Ming's body. "This feeling, is it the Jikai type?" Wu Ming extended his hand and moved his arm that was already covered in metal. When the clone gave Wu Ming the metal sphere, he didn't tell Wu Ming how to use it. He simply told him to inject devil power into it. He didn't expect it to be an external armor of the Jikai type. However, it didn't seem to be just that. With his mind, a lens appeared in Wu Ming's left eye. Through the lens, Wu Ming could see things like analysis. However, because Wu Ming wasn't a Jikai type, he couldn't understand the data. "I see. Is part of the Jikai type's ability in this armor?" Wu Ming understood the function of this thing. The metal sphere from before could be said to be a byproduct of Shiobi's split. It could also be said to be an inferior version of the Jikai type. Wu Ming was no longer surprised by the Jikai type that evolved from just 5 small square boxes. The Jikai type was a bug. Because Wu Ming didn't have the Jikai type's calculation ability, he couldn't inherit all of this power. However, it was still possible to use a weapon. Wu Ming raised his 2 arms that were covered in thin metal and aimed at the gnomes and forest spirits. "Let me try. Something that contains Shiobi's feelings." Pseudo Sky Strike. After Wu Ming finished speaking, the magic power in his body burned fiercely like fuel. Wu Ming's entire body shone like a bright star in the night. Then, 2 long sniper rifle barrels extended from Wu Ming's palms. Simulating the Sky Strike of the Skywing type, the 2 forces instantly condensed, and then, boom! 2 huge cannonball-like sounds resounded through the sky. 2 meteors flew straight toward the forest spirits' magic airships and the gnomes' magic fleet. Boom! There were violent roars on both sides and flames shone in the night. From the flames, Wu Ming could vaguely see that a few of the gnomes' ships had fallen. On the other hand, the magic airship of the forest fairies was fine. It made sense. The forest spirits' airships were definitely filled with defensive spells. Even if the gnomes' fleet had defensive spells, they wouldn't be able to use them as well as the forest spirit. After all, Wuming's previous attack had expended a lot of magic power, but it had only brought down a few of the gnome's magic airships. Is it because of the imitation? Wuming looked at the gun barrel that was still smoking due to the overload. However, he had achieved his goal, which was to start this war that wouldn't start for a long time. Wuming looked at the gigantic whale-like fantasy breed, Abendheim. After removing the armor on his body and placing the metal ball into the golden ripples, Wuming created another clone, and his main body flew toward Abendheim. The clone that had 50% of Wuming's main body remained where it was. The only difference was that the left arm of the clone was covered in a black glove. Plan B had begun. Chapter 437. On the fantasy breed Abendheim, the green-haired Skywing breed's first creation, Azrael, sat on the edge of a rock, casually looking at the joint fleet of the forest elves and gnomes. Truly a bunch of people who don't know their limits, meow, Azrael said with a peculiar tone, her two eyes revealing death. This was a characteristic of the Skywing breeds. Looking directly into their eyes would mean seeing death. How boring! Why aren't they attacking yet? I can't wait to collect their heads. The final creation, Giliel, flew beside Azrael in boredom, her pink hair wantonly fluttering. Although she looked like a loser, the death in Giliel's eyes was no less than Azrael's. Well, after all, the other party is coming with such ferocity. It's best to be cautious, meow. Although that was what she said, Azrael's face was brimming with a frivolous smile. She did not believe that these people could defeat their creator, war god Artesius, even if they worked together. Besides, they had not yet worked together, and had instead chosen to split into two to form a tripartite confrontation. How sad! If they worked together, they might have had a chance, meow, Azrael said mockingly. Don't say that, Azrael. In any case, they'll definitely be defeated by Lord Artesius. It doesn't matter if they work together or not. Giliel flew behind Azrael, waving her hands as she calmly said. It seemed that the Skywings were truly confident in their creator, Artesius. After hearing Giliel's voice, Azrael lowered her head as if she had heard something terrifying. Ah, Azrael, are you still thinking of using the same trick? Giliel seemed to already know the outcome and quickly distanced herself from Azrael, who had lowered her head. Suddenly, Azrael flew up and ran toward Giliel. Wah, little Giliel, call me big sister, meow. No way, Giliel said evasively, and Azrael chased after her. Then let me hug you for a bit please, meow, hee, then try to catch up to me. Then, the two beautiful bird-like girls began to chase each other in the air. If one were to take a closer look, other than the length of their hair, the color of their hair, and their faces, the two of them were quite similar in terms of clothing style and body proportion. If one were to say that the two of them were fraternal twins, people would believe it. In truth, all the Skywing species looked similar. After all, they were all made from the feather fragments of the god of war, Arthas. It could be said that all the Skywing species were sisters. As for the wings, they were a necessity for the Skywing species. At this moment, Azrael and Gillian came to a halt and gazed into the distance. That wasn't where the forest goblins or goblins' fleets were located. Instead, it was an empty space. However, if one looked carefully, they would be able to see where the light came from. Skywings, goblins, and war god Artemisu, just wait for your destruction, Shinka said confidently. However, they would soon be slapped in the face. On the other side, the goblin fleet. Sure enough, the goblins' fleet had already begun to reload their marrow bombs after losing a few of their magic airship. Meanwhile, the goblins had temporarily pacified the fantasy breeds and giant breed. The arrogant goblin leader was prepared to use his secret weapon to destroy the Zeroth Void Blessing of the forest goblins and the Skystrike of the Skywings. There was no doubt that he was an arrogant fellow. The Skywings gathered together and activated Skystrike. Because Lord Artemisu did not appear for some reason, all the Skywings began to listen to Azrael's orders and prepared to use Sky Strike to simulate Artemis's divine strike to deal with the forest goblins and goblins. On the other side, at the forefront of the forest goblin fleet, Shinka stood at the bow of the fleet and nodded at the Zeroth void blessing prepared by the forest goblins behind her. On the other side, the goblin leader also nodded when he saw that the marrow bombs had already been reloaded. At the same time, the three sides seemed to have come to an agreement and unleashed their strongest attacks. Pseudo Sky Strike. Zeroth Void Blessing, release. Marrow Bomb, fire. A white holy light with golden edges, an energy pillar filled with green energy, and several missiles comparable to hydrogen bombs and atomic bombs were used at the same time. However, these three attacks seemed to be attracted by something and directly deviated from their predetermined trajectories, heading toward an empty space. Azrael realized something. That was where the Sky Strike that had started the battle had been fired. Wu Ming's doppelganger raised his left arm and activated the divine artifact-level weapon. Activate Arm of Greed. Waiting for Wu Ming to transfer the attacks of Skywing, forest elves, and goblins to the greedy arm, then Reeker would launch the desireless arm, releasing the huge attack stored in it, directly penetrating the core of the planet, and then Reeker would obtain the Star Cup. In this way, the war was over. The reason why Artesius didn't show up when Skywing launched the attack was because Wu Ming planned to take advantage of the situation while they were fighting. As if there was no boundary, the farthest place where Artesius was located exuded elf-like energy particles. The ground was some marble slabs, and in the center of the space, a white jade throne was placed there. That was Artesius's temple. A muscular man with multiple pairs of wings behind him, wearing a white robe similar to the ancient Greek style, sat on the white jade throne with his eyes closed. If one looked closely, the wings behind the man were almost identical to the wings of Skywing, except that he had 18 pairs of wings instead of one pair. There was no doubt that this man was the creator of Skywing, the strongest god of war, Artesius. Suddenly, an oval black portal appeared in that space, and Wu Ming's figure appeared from it. Artesius's temple naturally had resistance to space and time. Even Skywing, who could penetrate space at will, couldn't enter Artesius's temple unless Artesius allowed it. Wu Ming's portal skill was also a space manipulation skill in that world, but Wu Ming's portal easily passed through Artesius's temple. That was because of Wu Ming's Magus Incarnation ability. Magus Incarnation had the effect of enhancing the magic used, and Wu Ming's Double Incarnation ability doubled the effect directly. As a result, the temple, which originally couldn't be passed through, became accessible. This was also the reason why Wu Ming was able to enter the Forest Elite fleet that was equipped with spatial defensive tactic. After arriving at the temple, Razin frowned. That temple was full of fighting intent, killing intent, blood, and everything related to war. Wu Ming didn't like it very much. However, now was not the time to care about that kind of thing. Immediately, Wu Ming turned his gaze to the throne and looked at Artesius, whose eyes were closed. "Are you Artesius? You really look like a Skywing," Wu Ming said casually, looking quite relaxed. Hearing Wu Ming's voice, Arthas opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with intense battle intent, killing intent, and bloodthirst. It was a chilling sight. Wu Ming once heard that if you looked directly into the eyes of Skywing, you would see death. Now, Wu Ming said that if you looked directly into the eyes of Artesius, the creator of Skywing, you would also see death. Do you boring gods really create things based on your own appearance? Wu Ming said somewhat uninterestedly. You're finally here, god of another world. Artesius ignored Wu Ming's ridicule and began his speech. I've waited for too long. There's no one in this world who can defeat me. Only a different world can defeat me. Hearing Artesius's words, Wu Ming smiled. You have the same temperament as that god Welslana. He's also been looking for someone who can defeat him. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Artesius's eyes lit up. There's actually such a person in another world. If I can see that god Welslana, I'll definitely fight him. However, you won't have the chance. Wuming began to move. His legs moved toward Artesius. His speed became faster and faster. In an instant, Wuming's figure disappeared in front of Artesius. Immediately after, Wuming's voice came from behind Artesius. I've already defeated him. Today you'll be the same. Chapter 439. Wuming's voice fell, and a sword light swept across Artemisia's neck. Bang! A sound like a collision of steel came. Artemisio raised his hand, and caught the incoming sword of salvation with one hand. A trace of blood flowed from Wuming's blade and Artemisio's palm. Not to mention that the entire temple is my perception field, I have a good understanding of space. Don't try to show off your meager skill in front of an expert. Artemisio didn't care about the pain and blood and said calmly. Instead, the blood made Artemisio more energetic. That's right, what Wuming used just now was not the Phoenix Incarnation's lightning speed, but a simple space transfer magic. Although Wuming didn't use it before, it didn't mean that Wuming didn't know how to use it. It's just a simple test of your power. It's not like I'm displaying my slight skill in front of an expert. After saying that, Wu Ming once again used spatial transference magic and returned to his original position. Then, let's get started, Artemisio. Wuming brandished his divine blade of salvation, which was shaped like Excalibur, and pointed its tip at Artu. As you wish. After Artemisio finished speaking, his figure disappeared. There was no doubt that this was a more advanced space ability than the Skywings. At the moment when Artemisio disappeared, Wuming waved his sword fiercely behind him. Bang! The sound of steel colliding came again, and Wuming and Artemisio were shaken back. What a terrifying space ability, Artemisio! Wuming looked at Artemisio seriously. Although Wuming was called the Root Dragon and had the ability to adapt to space and time, it was basically passive. It could be said that he didn't have the slightest active skill. It could be said that the only time and space ability he had was the Phoenix Incarnation and the space transfer magic. It could only be said that Wuming was still too young. Perhaps he would have to wait until he reached adulthood to fully master the space ability. As for the Root Dragon, forget it, let's find another way. While Wuming spoke, Artesio also looked at his hand. There was a small bloodstain on his palm and a thick bloodstain on the back of his hand. These were all caused by Wuming's divine blade of salvation. The former was caused by Wuming being grabbed by Artesio when he ambushed him. With his self-healing ability, the wound was almost healed. The latter was a wound caused by Arthas's sneak attack on Wuming and the collision with Wuming's divine blade of salvation. The burning pain was transmitted to Arthas's nerve. Immediately, Artu activated Spirit, and the two wounds healed instantly. I didn't think that just contact and collision would be able to hurt me. As expected of a product from another world. I'm getting excited. Due to his injuries, the battle intent in Arte's eyes burned even brighter. This is the divine blade of salvation that killed countless god slayers. Not only that, but it also killed a lot of gods, Wuming said to Arthas with a raging smile on his face. When Rama held the divine blade of salvation as the last king, in addition to killing god slayers, he also killed other disobedient gods. After all, not all disobedient gods were on good terms with the last king. Just like Velaslana, if he met Rama, he would definitely challenge him until he died. Even Rama himself forgot how many enemies he killed, which meant that the enemy was not only the god slayers, but also the disobedient gods. The divine blade of salvation, huh? Then let me see its power. After that, Arthas gathered energy in the palm of his hand and formed a dark blade. Then, Arthas pointed the blade at Wuming. Arthas hoped that someone could defeat him, even if he died. However, this did not mean that Arthas would go easy on the opponent. To Arthas, defeating an opponent that he could not defeat was just a dream. However, Arthas especially hoped that this dream would come true. Therefore, Arthas would use all his strength to defeat Wu Ming. "He's coming, you're a traveler from another world." Archu roared angrily and sped up toward Wu Ming. "I have a name. Just call me Wu Ming." Wu Ming, like Arthas, roared and rushed toward Arthas with the divine blade of salvation. Bang! Two extremely powerful weapons collided with each other, creating a huge boom. Even the air was faintly distorted. Like a signal to start, the sounds of weapons colliding became more and more frequent, and the speed was getting faster and faster. Bang! 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 The two of them kept swinging their weapons at a speed that ordinary people could not see. Whether it was Wu Ming or Arthas, both of them were simply swinging their swords. Using their reflexes and their own reaction speed, the two of them kept attacking each other with all kinds of skills. The two of them kept moving around the temple. Countless sword and saber lights were emitted from the space between the two of them. Those were simple physical impacts caused by the speed and power of the attacks being too fast. The marble floor of the temple was destroyed by the two of them like tofu. Traces of chaos appeared everywhere in the temple. Even the throne of the temple was damaged. It was enough to show the intensity of the battle between the two of them. Bang! Suddenly, Wu Ming and Artemis separated and stared at each other. "I didn't expect you to be able to surpass me in hand-to-hand combat. I'm so happy." Arthas smiled like a Spartan as he looked at Wu Ming excitedly. "This was taught to me by my master, the Godslayer. Coupled with years of practice, I naturally have such martial arts. I'm quite interested in your martial arts, Arthas." After all, Arthas was born as a god of war and had always been the strongest. Wu Ming originally thought that Arthas would not be so meticulous in this aspect. As a god born from heaven and earth, shouldn't they generally be able to defeat their enemies with one move or use powerful magic? However, not only was Arthas able to fight Wu Ming in hand-to-hand combat, but he was also not at a disadvantage. This was beyond Wu Ming's expectations. Not only that, but Wu Ming also found that Arthas's martial arts did not seem like talent. That was why he raised this question. Then, Arthas answered Wu Ming's question. "My strongest name indeed comes from my powerful ability, Divine Strike. However, as the god of war, how can I not know martial arts?" That's right. The god of war did not just mean the god of war, but also the god of war. That was why Arthas was able to fight Wu Ming in hand-to-hand combat. But even so, you've reached the end of your road. As soon as Wu Ming finished speaking, the sword in Arthas's hand shattered instantly. It could not be helped. The sword was only created temporarily by Arthas using the energy in his body. Naturally, it was not as good as Wu Ming's divine sword of salvation. It was a miracle that Arthas was able to hold on for so long in hand-to-hand combat with Wu Ming. Arthas did not have a specific weapon. As the strongest god of war, his body was the best weapon. The collision with Wu Ming's divine sword of salvation proved this point. However, Arthas would not be foolish enough to go head-to-head with his opponent's divine weapon. "In that case, I'll let you have a taste of my magic." Chapter 440. After Arthas finished speaking, his figure instantly disappeared and merged into the void. Immediately, the entire space in the temple began to fluctuate. "Because I'm the god of war, I don't know much magic other than melee combat, and I'm not going to use magic. In that case, I only have one move left, and that is Divine Strike." That was the upgraded version of Skywing Race's Divine Strike. No, to be precise, Skywing Race's Divine Strike was an inferior version of Arthas' Divine Strike. As the creator of Skywing Race, Arthas could use all of Skywing Race's abilities. However, even though Archu said that he didn't have many moves, the hand-to-hand combat just now was enough to prove that he was worthy of being called the god of war. However, Arthas wasn't going to use Divine Strike. Instead, he was going to use Skystrike. You just released a simulated Skystrike, right? Then let's see how strong my Skystrike is. Before Wu Ming could react, Arthas' voice stopped abruptly, and the elves in the entire space instantly rioted. That was the fear of death that the elves, who were living energy, had. Skystrike. There was no fancy incantation, nor was there any fancy preparation. Arthas only said that, and in an instant, a terrifying energy locked onto Wu Ming. Wu Ming could feel that it was more powerful than the Skystrike he released with the simulated armor. Boom! The explosion occurred in the temple, which was not very big, and the flames produced by the explosion covered the entire temple. Arthas' figure emerged from the space, looking at Wu Ming's position in the temple, slightly surprised. Now, there was a huge and strange semicircular shield at Silent Cry's position. But upon closer inspection, it wasn't a semicircular shield at all. It was clearly a semicircular defensive barrier formed by countless shields stacked together. I didn't expect you to have such a trick, Arthas praised. As if hearing Arthas' praise, the defensive barrier formed by the shields moved. Crack, crack, crack. With a burst of cracking sound, the shields that formed the defensive barrier disintegrated, revealing Wu Ming's figure. The divine sword of salvation in his hand turned into a Manchala square that only revealed a few grids, floating behind Wu Ming. Buzz! Manchala's square formation shook slightly, and countless empty squares appeared behind Wu Ming. Then, these dozens of shields were like swallows returning to their nest, all of them safely and automatically entering the squares. All the shields went into all the empty squares, no more, no less. Subsequently, the Manchala square condensed and turned into a shining platinum holy sword. It was the divine sword of salvation. Those shields were the Manchala square's divine sword of salvation's divine sword. The moment Arthas released the sky attack, Wu Ming turned the divine sword of salvation into the Manchala square. He took out the countless defensive equipment stored in the Manchala square to form a semicircular defensive barrier. When Wu Ming was in the God Slayer's world, the holy sword light cannon that he released was blocked by the Aegis shield in the Manchala square by the last king, Rama. However, that was a god's clone after all. Meanwhile, Arthas, who was facing Wu Ming, was the real god of this world. Wu Ming dared not be careless, so he surrounded himself with tens of shields. Although Wu Ming would not die even if he was hit by the sky attack, who would want to take it head-on if they could defend themselves? I see. Is that the function of this divine weapon? It's a great weapon. Even I want to take it for myself. Arthas had a smile on his face. He was excited to have an opponent who could defeat him. Come at me if you can, Artemisia. I have a lot of treasures. Wu Ming was not mad at Arthas for being a robber. Instead, he encouraged Arthas while smiling. Try my god relic barrage next, Arthas. Wu Ming tossed the divine sword of salvation behind him as soon as he was done speaking. There were ripples in the air as if it had melted into water. Subsequently, countless illusory grids appeared behind Wu Ming. The countless swords, sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and other weapons in the grids were aimed at Arthas. Subsequently, countless god relics were shot at Arthas as he frowned. You can't hurt me if that's all you've got. Arthas used his spatial ability to hide in an alternate dimension as he spoke. However, Wu Ming had no intention of stopping at all. Instead, he sped up the speed of the god relic's barrage. Bang! 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 Wave after wave of god relics were shot at where Arthas was hiding. All of the god relics hit the ground directly, causing an intense explosion. It was only natural that such an outcome would happen because Arthas had already entered an alternate dimension. However, some of the weapons were distorted when they passed through the alternate dimension that Arthas was hiding in. Wu Ming stopped the god relic's barrage and retrieved all of them with the Manchala formation's retrieval function. Arthas, who had just emerged from the alternate dimension, was next. At the moment there were wounds all over his body. There were even a couple of piercing wounds on his chest and abdomen. I can't believe you have a god relic that can pierce through dimensions. Arthas frowned. That was right. There were a couple of god relics that could pierce through dimensions hidden among the god relic. As Arthas was careless, the god relics hurt him when they pierced through his body. Apart from that, the god relics were on par with grade A relic. It was a piece of cake for them to break through Arthas's defense. Wu-Ming was surprised that there were only a couple of piercing wounds on Arthas when there were so many god relics at the same time. However, it did not matter to him. So, I've broken through your dimensional ability, Arthas. Wu-Ming smiled at Arthas. Now, Arthas could no longer use his dimensional ability to avoid being hurt. If Lin Huang were to use a skill that targeted space and crushed Arthas's divine marrow, Arthas would die. Arthas wanted someone to defeat him. He did not mind being killed, but he did not want to die in such a humiliating way. The reason why Arthas was still alive despite having so many piercing wounds on his body was that his divine marrow was not hit. In other words, Arthas had protected his divine marrow when he was attacked. However, even if he managed to protect his divine marrow, Arthas would not choose to use his dimensional ability to dodge Wu-Ming's god relic's barrage again. First of all, he would really die if Lin Huang managed to break through his divine marrow's defense. Moreover, Arthas was a god of combat. He knew that the best defense was offense. I don't like defense. Attacking suits me better. Arthas's eyes gleamed as soon as he was done speaking. An energy sword appeared in his hand again. Then, I'll be a little more serious. Then, the two of them began to fight again. Chapter 441. Wu-Ming and Artesio's battlefield had changed. Wu-Ming felt that Artesio's war god temple was too small, so he took out the staff of Anzi-Wergen and activated the inherent barrier. Artesio was not afraid of the enemy's home ground. Instead, he was more excited. Although the body was made by Wu-Ming's main body, the staff of Anzi-Wergen and other items in Wu-Ming's Draconis dimension were real. The principle was to open a new door in Wu-Ming's Draconis dimension. That door was the secret pattern on the root dragon's body made by Wu-Ming, so those items were real. The third floor of the great underground tomb of Nazalik. Wu-Ming's figure shuttled through the tomb temple on the third floor, followed by a white figure. It was Artesio. The first floor and the second floor were directly destroyed by Wu-Ming and Artesio, so the two's battlefield came to the tomb temple on the third floor. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. After that, Wu-Ming's figure disappeared from Artesio's eyes. Huh? Space-time manipulation? Artesio was worthy of being an expert in space-time manipulation. He recognized the nature of the Phoenix incarnation at a glance. Sure enough, you saw through it. Wu-Ming's voice came from the void. Because he was too fast, his voice sounded like it came from all directions. The Phoenix incarnation was said to speed up his speed, but the principle was to enter the lightning speed state. That lightning speed state actually allowed him to enter a different accelerated space from this spacetime. In this space, everything became incomparably slow, and one's body also gained the ability to accelerate by a small margin. However, the price was an overload on one's body. If a new Godslayer were to use this skill, his body would experience severe pain due to overload in less than a minute. But for Wu-Ming, the root dragon, who had extremely high physical fitness, that was not a problem at all. That was why Wu-Ming could use Phoenix without any side effect. Come and feel my space-time manipulation. After Wu-Ming finished speaking, he suddenly appeared behind Artemisio. Artemisio, on the other hand, was too shocked by Wu-Ming's methods to react. Thus, there was a short lapse in his memory. However, compared to a battle between experts, this moment of inattention would often become the key to victory or defeat. Go down! After saying that, Wu Ming immediately raised his divine power, which was enchanted with Giant's instant cast, and smashed it toward Artesius's heart. Boom! In an instant, Arthu's figure was buried under the dark stone slabs of the Temple of Tombs. At the same time, the entire floor of the third floor shattered. In short, just like the first and second floor, the entire third floor was destroyed. Boom! Accompanied by a loud roar, the sky above the fourth floor of the underground lake seemed to be broken, and countless broken stones and other things came to the fourth floor of the underground lake. Plop, plop, plop. Accompanied by the sound of countless stones falling into the water, Wu Ming's figure floated above the lake. Wu Ming looked at the lake vigilantly. The blow just now did hit Artesio's heart, but Wu Ming had a feeling that Artesio was not dead yet. Although Wu Ming hid his 12 incarnations' ability to surprise Artesio, he successfully used Phoenix to speed up Artesio, and then used Giant's power to hit Artesio. However, Artesio must have some means to avoid fatal injuries. Wu Ming heard from Xiaobi that if you want to kill a god, you must destroy the god's divine essence. Just like human heart and brain, the divine essence was the root of the god. The elven corridor was also the first to give birth to the god's divine essence. However, unlike human heart and brain, the god's divine essence was not necessarily in the heart, and it might not even be in the brain, but in any part of the body. Moreover, the god's weakness was really only the divine essence. Unlike human heart and brain, serious injuries to other parts of the body may also be fatal. The god's body was not afraid of physical damage. In fact, the god's body was a practical skin bag. As long as the divine essence was intact, the god could even abandon the body and make another one. Wu Ming did hit Artesio's heart just now. Under that kind of attack, even Artesio's body should be dead if the divine essence was in the heart. Since Wu Ming could still feel that Artesio was still alive, it meant that Artesio's divine essence was probably not in the heart. Not to mention that, Wu Ming put a lot of effort in order to kill Artesio with one blow. Wu Ming's current divine essence was not as powerful as his original body, so he could only use his 12 incarnations one by one, and their power was greatly reduced. In addition, he couldn't use double incarnations normally. The Titan incarnation just now could be so powerful because of overload, but also because of that, Wu Ming's Titan ability was temporarily unavailable. Because Wu Ming used Titan incarnation, the slate representing Titan incarnation in Wu Ming's heart was in a blood-red state, which meant that this ability was temporarily unavailable. That was the price of instantaneous power, but it was also the price of overloading, and that price would take about 3 days. Titan incarnation was Wu Ming's most commonly used ability. After all, it was simple and crude. Now that this ability was sealed, Wu Ming could be said to have lost a great help. However, it couldn't be said to be absolute. Simply put, it wasn't a big deal. Then, Artesio flew out of the underground lake. Sure enough, although Artesio was in a mess, and his heart was protruding, Artesio did not show any signs of dying. There was no doubt that the spirit essence was not in his heart. Because Wu Ming attacked from behind, the left part of his chest that was covered by his clothes bulged. Speaking of which, the scene of a man's chest bulging was too beautiful to believe. You wanted to hit my spirit essence from the beginning? That's a good plan. Although Wu Ming didn't use any tricks at all. I have to say you're really a monster, Artesio. Even if Wu Ming didn't hit his spirit essence, he should have been affected by Wu Ming's Titan incarnation, but Artesio didn't show any signs of damage. Ha ha ha! I am the strongest god of war, the god of war! Artesio roared, and the spirit essence in his body was activated, and all the damage on his body was healed. He looked just like when he first met Wu Ming. You should have more trump cards, right? I know I'm going to lose soon, but my pride won't allow me to admit defeat. Artesio was really smart. He also knew that he would be defeated by Wu Ming later, so he said it bluntly. In that case, I will bet everything I have to release this final divine strike. Chapter 442. The gods of discord were not weak, but even so, they were not that strong. The skywing species had killed gods, the Kikai species had the ability to kill gods, and the forest goblins and goblins had developed weapons that could kill gods. Through these, it was clear that gods were not unkillable. In fact, to put it simply, a god was a creature that was stronger than other creatures. Wu Ming was a god, wasn't he? Therefore, although Wu Ming was wary of the gods of this world, he did not take them too seriously. Putting aside the fact that Wu Ming, who was a god slayer, was the natural enemy of these gods, Wu Ming had 12 clones that were comparable to 12 relics and the divine sword of salvation that contained almost all mythical god relic. Not to mention, the divine sword of salvation was powerful. It was a holy sword that had the power to split a star. Then, after Wu Ming met Arceus, he did not think that the gods of this world were weak. Although he was prepared for it, Arceus's strength still surprised Wu Ming. Arceus's powerful body could fight Wu Ming to a standstill. His martial arts skills were not invincible, but they were not weaker than Wu Ming's. He was only slightly weaker in hand-to-hand combat with Wu Ming. His almost endless spirit energy was used to power his powerful sky attack, and its power was comparable to the Skywing's divine sword. Arceus could kill gods, so it was not unreasonable for him to be called the most powerful god of war. However, that did not mean that Wu Ming was afraid of him. Wu Ming had already estimated that only Arceus, who was known as the most powerful god of war, could fight him. Arceus was slightly weaker than Wu Ming in hand-to-hand combat. His sky attack could not break through the defense of Wu Ming's god relic shield, and his hiding space could be broken. Moreover, Wu Ming could adapt to time and space, so he was immune to most of the damage and skill effects in time and space. It could be said that Wu Ming had the upper hand over Arceus. When Arceus saw Wu Ming, he felt a little uneasy. "I'm no match for him." This was Arceus' thought. However, Arceus did not believe in empty words, nor would he bow down to Kirin's overbearing aura. Only when he was completely defeated, or even killed, would Arceus admit that he was the strongest god of war. But his wish to be defeated had been fulfilled. Thus, Arceus and Wu Ming began fighting one-on-one. He did not even bother with his Skywing subordinates, which was why Arceus did not show up. The Skywing species had been created by Arceus as a weapon to kill him. However, Arceus was not a pedantic person. After knowing that his creations could not kill him, Arceus did not count on the Skywing species. It was rare for him to meet someone who could defeat him. Arceus was excited. However, after using so many means, both Wu Ming and Arceus knew that even if the two of them continued to fight normally, they would not be able to finish it in a short time. Arceus did not like to drag things out. He was ready to use his ultimate move. Wu Ming, on the other hand, was passive. In fact, the battle with Arceus was not bad. Wu Ming did not want to end it so quickly, but if it was his opponent's opinion, Wu Ming would still respect it. "Then, I'll also prepare a big one." After Wu Ming said that, he let go of the Sword of Salvation, and the Sword of Salvation merged into Wu Ming's body like a spirit. Immediately, Wu Ming raised his right hand and began to gather magical power. In Wu Ming's inner world, there were 10 small stone plates on the huge stone plate, one of which was already shining red. That was the stone plate representing the Titan. Immediately, the pointer in the center of the stone plate turned, and the long and short pointers pointed to the stone plate at 11 o'clock. The stone plate was engraved with a slowly burning sun, which made people feel hot just by looking at it. In an instant, the stone plate representing the incarnation of the sun turned scarlet, which meant that the sun stone plate could no longer be used. "For victory, come to me quickly. Immortal sun, please grant me a shining steed. Spirited horse, with the lifeline of my origin dragon, I bestow upon thee eternal glory. Bring me the shining wheel of light that symbolizes me." With Wuming's words, a small fireball appeared in Wuming's hand. In an instant, the small fireball continued to expand and became extremely huge in an instant. Inside the fireball, the shape of a steed could be vaguely seen. The steed was constantly restless, and the fireball exuded intense heat. The extremely high temperature made the space begin to distort, and it felt like it was going to break. Wuming looked at Arthas on the opposite side. At that moment, a large number of spirits flashed around Arthas's body, and the sky above the underground lake on the 4th floor of Nazalic instantly became dim. A huge cloud tornado slowly hovered above Arthas's head. Arthas was even more flashy than Wuming. Divine strike! Arthas's voice fell, and a huge pillar like a huge holy sword beam connected to Arthas through the cloud tornado above the sky, and countless energy spewed toward Wuming. Wuming simply gathered his power and then threw it in the direction of Arthas's divine strike. In the process of throwing, the fireball expanded a lot again, and it really looked like the sun. At that moment, the entire 4th floor's space was shattered at a speed visible to the naked eye, which was the precursor of the two powerful attacks about to collide. Boom! The sun and the light pillar collided, causing an extremely violent explosion. The explosion covered the entire Nazalic. The strong attack destroyed the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th floors of Nazalic. The underground tomb of Nazalic disappeared. It couldn't withstand the double destruction of Divine Strike and the sun. After the barrier of Nazalic was broken, the damage caused by the two attacks also began to affect Arthas's temple. In just an instant, Arthas's temple melted. In the outside world, Schick was dumbfounded as he watched his team's attacks being diverted to another direction. Schenker was very smart. How could he not understand what was going on? It was clear that his Zeroth Ward of the Void was used by someone else. Retreat! Schenker immediately ordered. Yes. The captain immediately ordered the fleet to retreat. They didn't know who the enemy was, so it was unwise to attack rashly. Obviously, the goblins on the opposite side also thought the same. The goblins' magic airship also began to slowly retreat. At that moment, a huge crack appeared in the space above Abendheim. Immediately, like glass breaking, the space above Abendheim shattered. Boom! Chapter 443. Above Abendheim, all the Skywings had shrunk to the size of 10-year-old children because they had all unleashed the pseudo-divine strike together. Their original plan was to get rid of the forest goblins and goblins in one fell swoop, so the Skywings had converted all their energy into Sky Strike and gathered it into that pseudo-god strike. The Skywings' special characteristic was that after unleashing all their energy, their bodies would rapidly shrink after unleashing their Sky Strike. What a disgusting curse. Slurp. Wipe away your saliva. At the same time, their combat strength was also greatly reduced. Although it was not to the point where they could kill just about anyone, the Skywings found it hard to resist against creatures like forest fairies, goblins, orcs, and vampires. When Azriel saw that her sister's attacks had been diverted, she understood that they had fallen into a trap. Not only that, but the forest fairies and gnomes had also fallen into a trap. The Forest Elite Species Alliance, the Gnome Species Alliance, and the Winged Species Alliance had all been set up. Now, it was certain that the two Sky Strikes that had been unleashed by an unknown person were from the unknown person who had set the trap for the Skywings. Damn it, I can't continue fighting like this. Abent, I'm begging you, meow. Azriel patted the ground beneath her weakly. The entire residence of the Skywing species was occupied by the huge fantasy breed, Abendheim. After Azriel finished speaking, a ripple appeared. It was Abendheim nodding. Even if the Skywings could no longer fight, there was still Abendheim, a fantasy breed that had been personally named by Artheus. A fantasy breed that could catch Artheus's eye and was willing to follow him could not possibly be weak. After all, even though Artheus the god of war was a stubborn old man who had a death wish, he truly acknowledged the strong. However, at this moment the space above the skywings, or rather, above Abendheim, shattered. Bang! Like glass shattering, the space above Abendheim exploded. The shattered space shards rained down on Abendheim. What happened, meow? Azrael said uneasily. The reason why she felt uneasy was because she had sensed the aura of her master, the god of war Artreus, from the shattered space. It was an extremely weak aura, giving people the feeling that she was about to dissipate and die. However, Azrael did not think that anyone could defeat or kill her mistress. Therefore, her mistress was the strongest. Azrael was not the only one who thought this. The other Skywings thought the same. In their eyes, their master was the strongest, and there was simply no one who could defeat him. However, just as the Forest Sprite Alliance and the Gnome Alliance were about to retreat, and the Skywings were lost in their fantasies, a figure flew out of the shattered space, or rather, fell out. Archu used his 18 wings to adjust his body and slowly landed on Abendheim, right in front of the Skywings. Wuming also came out of the shattered space right after Artexiu. Wuming was not in a hurry to chase after Artexiu. He turned around and began to speed up the repair of the shattered space. Although this broken space was automatically repairing itself, if someone who had mastered spatial technology took the initiative to repair it, it could still speed up the repair of the broken space. During this time, Azrael and the others hurriedly went to Artexiu's side and got down on one knee to salute him. "Lord Artexiu," Azrael sorrowfully said. She could sense that her master's spirit essence was gone, and his aura was weakening bit by bit. It could be said that Artexiu was already very strong to have been able to hold on for so long. That was also the reason why Wu Ming didn't rush to catch up with Artesio, because under the double explosion of Divine Strike and Sun, which destroyed 2 small worlds, Artesio was undoubtedly affected, and his spirit essence was also shattered because of it. In short, Artexio had already lost. His spirit essence had been completely destroyed by Wu Ming. Seeing that Azrael wanted to say something, Artexio directly waved his hand to stop her. "This battle really made me happy. I'm very satisfied, I'm very happy, ha ha." Artexio's laughter spread from Abendheim to the surrounding area. The Forest Elves Alliance and the Goblin Alliance could already hear it. Even so, Hink Nilbar had no intention of going back to collect the heads. He would undoubtedly die if he did. After all, the person who defeated Artesius was still repairing the shattered space above Abendheim. Roar! At that moment, a dragon roared, and a huge dragon rose from the ground behind the Forest Elves Alliance, roaring and rushing toward Artexiu's direction. Immediately afterward, 6 more dragon shadows flew from the back of the Forest Elves Alliance, following the dragon in front, rushing toward Artexiu. Artexiu once killed the leader of those dragons, the Dragon King of the Forest Elves Alliance. Therefore, the Forest Elves Alliance not only became enemies with the Kikai Elves Alliance, but also had quite an irreconcilable hatred with Artexiu. Of course, the Forest Elves Alliance wasn't happy to kill their leader, and it just so happened that Artexiu was extremely weak now, and one of the Forest Elves Alliance could kill him. But because of the anger of the Forest Elves Alliance, they all rushed out after ignoring Hink's signal to retreat, and they were ready to kill the enemy with all their strength. Bending Whistle. 2 words came out of the Forest Elves Alliance's mouth, Bending Whistle. It was something similar to the Skystrike. After releasing Skystrike, the Skystrike would turn the Skystrike into a 10-year-old child's body, and its power would be suppressed. It could be described as a big killer move, because either the opponent would die, or the Forest Elves Alliance would die because they had no power. It was that simple. The Forest Elves Alliance's Bending Whistle was a powerful skill that condensed the whole body's vitality and magical power to release everything. That was also a big killer move. Whether the opponent died or not, the Forest Elves Alliance would definitely die. However, that also represented how irreconcilable the Forest Elves Alliance and Artexiu were. In an instant, the first Forest Elves Alliance opened its mouth, and its whole body's energy and vitality were condensing. The leader of the Forest Elves Alliance was ready to release its full attack at the cost of its life. Roar! Not only that, but the 6 Forest Elves Alliance behind it also began to prepare to launch Bending Whistle. It seemed that those Forest Elves Alliance also had the idea of destroying all the Skywing Elves Alliance, so they launched that fatal attack. However, Wuming wouldn't just stand by and watch. In those few seconds, Wuming repaired the broken space in the sky and used space teleportation to reach the path of Bending Whistle. In an instant, Wuming took out the golden ball from his golden ripple and used it again. Mechanical armor covered Wuming's body. Pseudo-Dragon Roar. Are the forest spirits ready to use the teleportation spell against the fleet? Because of the sense of crisis, Schenker had already ordered people to prepare the teleportation spell, ready to teleport the entire forest spirit fleet away. Yes, we're ready and we're just waiting for your order, the captain said calmly as he saluted Schick. If you're ready, just activate it, you idiot. Schenker glared at the captain angrily. We're preparing to escape. Since we're ready, what are we waiting for? Do we want them to attack us? After all, we don't know Wuming's current situation, and we don't know if he's a friend or foe. Yes, I'll give the order now. The captain was surprised by Schenker's anger. This was the first time he had seen this lord angry. The captain left to inform the teleportation spell, while Schenker still stood at the bow of the warship, looking at Wuming, who was using the X-ray vision spell. How dare you toy with me, Schenker Nilbar, in the palm of your hand. Even if you're a god, wait for my revenge. After all, the Zeroth ward of the void that she, Hink Nilbarian, had developed was not for anything else but to slay a god. And the god that Hink Nilbarian wanted to slay the most was the creator of the forest elves, the forest god Canas. As long as there's no more Lord God, Nina and I can be together. He. Schenker's expression darkened. Accompanied by Schenker's laughter, the entire forest spirit fleet disappeared from the battlefield. At the same time, the goblin's magic airship had turned around. Intense flames erupted from the huge nozzle behind it. Then, the entire goblin fleet flew into the distance like a meteor shower. The fairy, dragon, fantasy, and giant species that had cooperated with the two sides were all dead. The fairy was in the forest spirit fleet, while the fantasy and giant species were behind the goblins. When they saw the goblins fleeing, they fled as well. Since their allies had fled, what was the point of them staying here? Thus, only the infant skywing species, fantasy breed Abantiheim, and Arthas, whose body was starting to fade, were left on the battlefield. Wuming did not care about the forest spirits and goblins. After eliminating the dragon spirits, Wuming landed on Abantiheim. In an instant, Abantheim exuded a threatening aura, and the Skywing, who had already turned into an infant, nervously looked at Wuming, protecting his dying master. Now, no matter how stupid the Skywing species were, they knew that their master, the most powerful war god Arthas, had been defeated, and the price was his life. They're quite loyal to you, Arthas. Wuming did not do anything but stood in front of Arthas and said in a light tone, "They are indeed a group of subordinates worthy of my trust. Unfortunately, I didn't pay attention to them in the past," Arthas said calmly. Wu Ming and Artesius didn't look like enemies who had just fought to the death a few minutes ago. Instead, they looked like longtime friends. When Wuming's son and Arthas's divine strike destroyed Wuming's barrier and arrived at Arthas' temple, Wuming's son had already overwhelmed Arthas's divine strike and destroyed Arthas's divine essence in the temple's throne. That's right, the reason why Arthas was unharmed after being hit by Wuming's giant was because Arthas's divine essence was not in his body. Arthas was worthy of being called the strongest. To be able to keep his body from dissipating with his divine essence, it could be said that Arthas was truly the strongest in this world. Wu Ming thought so. After that, Wu Ming used the power of flood and annihilation to offset Wu Ming and Arthas's attack. After all, if the explosion caused by these two forces was allowed to continue expanding, not to mention whether the Skywings and Abenheim, who were closest to the Artexiu temple, would be able to survive, the planet would be bombarded with nuclear bombs again. Wu Ming used the power of flood and annihilation at the same time. The all-encompassing water wrapped around the explosion. The power of annihilation annihilated these powers, but the price was that the two avatars were like the sun and the giant. They fell into a red state and could not be used. Then, the temple was destroyed, and Artyu and Wu Ming came here from another dimension. The rest was what happened just now. Immediately, Wu Ming said the key words. "Are you satisfied with this battle, Arthas?" Chapter 445. Are you satisfied with this battle, aren't you? Ha 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 ha. After Wu Ming asked the question, Arthas started to laugh loudly. He laughed continuously. The Skywings were at a loss as to what to do as they looked at their somewhat crazy master before exchanging glances with each other. On the other hand, Wu Ming didn't say anything and continued to laugh at Artyu. After a few minutes, Artyu stopped laughing and looked at Wu Ming happily. I'm very satisfied with this battle, Wu Ming. Arthu's only wish was for someone to kill him and give him a defeat. Since you can separate the divine marrow from your main body, why don't you store it somewhere else? Wu Ming asked. He had not properly protected his only weakness and had instead placed it in the most vulnerable place. No matter how he thought about it, it was somewhat abnormal. Arthu's temple was the battlefield between Wu Ming and Artyu. Although the temple had initially been affected by the shockwaves from their battle, Wu Ming had used the fact that the battlefield was too small to activate the inherent barrier of Nazalic. Wu Ming did not think that Artyu was so wise as to predict that Wu Ming would find Arthu's temple too small and hide his divine marrow in the temple's throne. Unless, of course, Artyu had chosen death. When you came to this world, I already knew my end, Artyu calmly said as he began to tell a story. I really don't know you, but the Starcup told me that if I were to fight you, you would be strong enough to kill me. Arthu's words left Wu Ming puzzled. Starcup? Could the Starcup communicate with others? Was that not a scepter that represented the ownership of this planet? I'm not mistaken. That is indeed the Starcup, but that thing should be a replica or a clone of the Starcup because the real Starcup is still in the Elven Corridor. I can sense it. Artyu was a god born in the Elven Corridor where the Starcup was born, so he naturally had the ability to sense the Starcup's exact location, though it was very vague. It said that it could give me power. As long as I have it, I can defeat you. The method is very simple. I just need to choose it and hold it with both hands, Artyu continued. However, since Artyu said so, he definitely did not choose to accept the Starcup's power. I didn't choose that thing's power. As a god of war, taking shortcuts is a disgrace to me. Knowing that he would be defeated and killed, choosing to live with the power given by someone else was extremely ironic to Artyu. My god essence wasn't taken out by myself and placed on the throne of the temple. It was taken out by the Starcup. Arthu's words shocked Wu Ming. Did the Starcup come to life? After I rejected the Starcup, I was ready to use my power to destroy it, but the Starcup seemed to have been prepared for this. When I rejected it, it took advantage of my momentary distraction and drilled into the divine marrow in my body. Then, under my strong resistance, the Starcup and my divine marrow were ejected out of my body. After that, the Starcup sealed my divine marrow in the throne, and the Starcup disappeared. Listening to Arthu's series of strange words, Wu Ming was dumbfounded. This was really too strange. Logically speaking, the Starcup was a lifeless symbol of the planet's power, so it should not have come to trouble Artyu without permission. However, Wu-ming did not think that Archu was lying, because Archu did not know how to lie at all. He was a real man. However, this also explained why Archu was not that strong when he fought Wu-ming. In addition to hand-to-hand combat, magic battles, and ordinary chasing attacks, Archu had also used his ultimate move, Divine Strike. No matter what, Archu was recognized as the strongest. If that was all he had, it was unlikely that he would be known as the strongest in the world. It turned out that his divine marrow was a little affected. In other words, your true strength is actually more than that? Wu-ming asked. Let's not talk about other things first. The divine strike just now was not much worse than when I was at my peak. Even if I was at my peak, I would have been defeated by you. Archu was right. If Wu-ming had not used Flood and Annihilation to eliminate the damage that he had sustained, Archu would have been dead by now. Although Archu was about to die, his body had now become extremely dim. Archu also knew that Wu-ming had shown mercy in the end, so he had let go of it now. Having an opponent that he could not defeat even if he used all his strength was quite a good feeling. This was what Archu was thinking. Then, my friend, what do you think of my previous proposal? Archu asked a strange question. Before coming out of the shattered alternate space, Archu and Wu-ming had a short conversation. Archu had asked Wu-ming to become the new god of the Skywings and Abanti-heim. However, before Wu-ming could reply, Archu had been drawn out of the alternate space by the increasing spatial shattering and had arrived at Abanti-heim. I accept. After all, Wu-ming had already proven that Wu-ming had agreed when he had destroyed those dragon spirits. Archu smiled in relief. Ah, I have only lost once in 100 battles in my life. Meeting you is the happiest thing that has ever happened to me. Archu was like an old friend to Wu-ming, looking at Wu-ming with satisfaction before disappearing. Goodbye, my friend. Wu-ming watched Archu disappear. Archu, who had lost his god's vital spirit essence and had fought fiercely with Wu-ming, was beyond saving. This was like a servant's spirit core. Once the spirit core was shattered, the servant would be forced to leave. There was no other way. However, there should be other ways, such as the Star Cup. However, Archu had only lost once in 100 battles in this world. This was the path he had chosen, and Wu-ming would not stop him. It had to be said that Arthas was a good friend. Between Silent Wonder and Arthas, it could be said that they had developed true feelings for each other. At this moment, Wu-ming suddenly thought of a problem. There was a problem with the Star Cup, a huge problem that could threaten Artetheus. However, even if there was a problem with the Star Cup, the rules of its appearance should not have changed. The only thing left was the most powerful divine soul seed, or rather, the Star Cup piercing through the core of the planet. Now, the Star Cup was about to be released from the planet's core. You guys stay here obediently. Remember to dodge if there is any danger. After Wu-ming said that, he opened a black portal and instantly went in, leaving behind a group of Skywing infants who did not know what to do and looked at each other. Chapter 446. Moving forward in the timeline, Wu-ming's clone was using the greedy arm to absorb the attacks of the forest elves, goblins, and Skywing species. The body of Wu-ming's clone was collapsing at a visible rate, including the pitch-black demon-like greedy arm. After all, this was the ultimate move of the three forces, which was enough to kill a god. Being attracted by the pseudo-greedy arm created by Wu-ming, there was naturally a price to pay for absorbing it. In addition, Wu-ming was not a clone of his main body that was currently in the root, but a clone of a clone. Although his strength was still passable, he would not be able to withstand the Zeroth ward of the void of the forest elves, the marrow explosion of the goblins, and the Skywing species' collective pseudo-godly strike. The attacks of the three forces were transformed into an energy ball comparable to a large fireball, which was absorbed by Wu-ming's greedy arm. Because the forest elves and goblins were preparing to retreat, and the Skywing species were turning into infants, No one attacked Wuming, which also allowed Wuming to be at ease. Just like that, by the time the large energy ball was almost completely absorbed, the body of Wuming's clone was almost broken beyond recognition. The greedy arm on the left hand of the clone was already full of cracks, as if it would not be surprising if it shattered at any moment. Bang! Sure enough, the pitch-black greedy arm on Wuming's left hand shattered like a mirror, turning into specks of light that scattered into the air. Well, fortunately, the desireless arm has already stored these attacks, so there's no need for them, Wuming's clone said weakly like a badly damaged puppet. Immediately afterward, the clone left like a spirit, turning into specks of magic particles starting from its feet and flying into the air with the magic particles of the greedy arm that had not completely dissipated. At the same time, in the southwest direction of the continent of Yar-Ala, a white-haired man wearing a tattered brown cloak, a hood over his head, goggles over his eyes, and a scarf over his mouth and nose came out of a hidden underground cave. He was none other than Rick, who had snuck into the southwestern part of Yar-Ala from Lucia. Because of Wuming's teleportation gate, Wuming only needed to make a trip here, then open the teleportation gate, and Rick could easily come over. Looking at his glove shining, Rick wore a glove on his right hand. It was a glove as beautiful as an angel, white and flawless. This was the twin item that complemented the pitch-black greedy arm. The desireless arm. Rick knew that this meant that Wuming had successfully absorbed the attacks of the three forces. This was Wuming's signal to Rick that he could take action. Then, let me end this war, Rick said in a heavy tone, as if he had taken on a heavy burden. Then, Rick raised his right hand and took out a gemstone with his left hand. It was a crystal that stored magic. He only needed to break it to release the magic within. After all, using the desireless arm required the release of magic. As a human of this world, Rick did not have the energy sprite of this world, nor did he have the magic that Wuming used, so he could not use the desireless arm normally. Wuming gave the crystal to Rick so that he could use it to release the desireless arm. Release, desireless arm. Rick roared and slammed the crystal into the desireless arm. As a counterfeit world-class item, the desireless arm had a rather powerful appearance. When the crystal was slammed into the desireless arm, there was no doubt that the crystal that stored magic was broken. The broken crystal turned into bits of flying debris and disappeared, and the magic in it had been absorbed by the desireless arm. Like a flame that got oil, the desireless arm instantly burst out a powerful airwave, and it began to emit endless white light. Rick looked at the desireless arm that was constantly emitting strong light and airwaves, and Rick remembered Wuming's words. The Villo said, "Imagine a strong penetrating force, and press the liberated desireless arm to the ground under your feet. The energy stored in the desireless arm will penetrate the Earth's core and make the elf corridor appear. In this way, the star cup will also appear." Rick looked at the light in his hand that would end everything and smiled bitterly. For peace, for the future of mankind, for everyone in the village, for his sister, for the followers who were willing to turn into ghosts, for all of this, Rick and even mankind had sacrificed a lot. However, this day had finally arrived. Rick put down the raised desireless arm, aimed at the ground, and prepared to press it down. At this moment, a dark space door suddenly appeared in the sky, and Wuming's figure appeared from it. "Rick, stop. There's a problem with the star cup," Wuming shouted at Rick. Rick's pupils shrank, and then he quickly stopped pressing his arm down. "There's a problem with the star cup?" Rick looked at Wuming worriedly. But before Wuming could explain, suddenly, a green figure rushed toward the defenseless Rick. Wuming reacted instantly, and Wuming instantly activated the Phoenix incarnation. Violent energy filled the Phoenix stone plate in Wuming's heart, turning it into a red alert state. If he didn't do this, Wuming didn't have the confidence to save Rick before the green figure. The green figure was too close to Rick, as if deliberately prepared. "Poochie!" "Ugh!" The sound of flesh being separated echoed, and Rick's muffled groan followed. Wu-Ming grabbed Rick and brought him to the side. The green figure held something in her hand, and came in front of Wu-Ming. That thing was a pure white glove, like an angel's glove. However, there were traces of blood on the glove, which dyed the angel's arm red. On our side, Rick was sweating profusely. His left hand was hugging his only remaining right arm, and he was sweating profusely. That's right, the green figure took away the desireless arm along with Rick's right hand. At this moment, Wu-Ming also clearly saw the green figure. The one who snatched Rick's arm was a female. She had long ears like the elves of the forest, and her golden hair reached her waist. Although her soft green clothes were a little conservative, they still couldn't completely cover her voluptuous and sexy body. Forest spirit? Rick looked at the woman in front of him with some resentment. No, I'm afraid that's the creator of the forest spirit, forest god Canis. After sensing the creature in front of him that looked like a forest spirit, Wu-Ming was very sure that her aura was similar to Arceus. Without a doubt, this was a god. Forest god Canis? Rick clearly didn't expect that a small character like him would be targeted by a god. However, Canis is a bit strange. Wu-Ming narrowed his eyes and looked at Canis. Although it was indeed forest god Canis, right now Canis' eyes were lifeless, as if he was a puppet. Wu-Ming more or less guessed the situation. At this moment, Canis grabbed the desireless arm and pressed it to the ground. Boom! In an instant, a huge amount of energy burst out from the ground. Chapter 447. Boom! A huge amount of energy came from underground, and the ground where Wu-Ming and Rick were was completely shattered. Wu-Ming had no choice but to bring Rick into the sky. As expected, the target of the manipulated Canis was only Rick's right hand, or rather, whether it could pierce through the desireless arm in the Earth's core? Wu-Ming said. At this point, Wu-Ming could also understand that Canis must have accepted the temptation of the Star Cup, accepted the power of the Star Cup, and ended up being manipulated. On the way here, Wu-Ming thought that the Star Cup had tempted Arceus. Although Arceus had rejected it, he was still tricked by the Star Cup. Then, wouldn't the Star Cup look for other divine seeds? The answer was no. Canis was the new divine seed that the Star Cup was looking for. After Canis accepted the temptation of the Star Cup took control of Caina's body and used him like a puppet. Its purpose was to save itself from the elf corridor. The Star Cup first looked for Arceus because he was the strongest war god, but because Arceus had rejected and wanted to kill itself, the Star Cup paid Arceus a price. Then, the Star Cup looked for Canis, and Canis was afraid of the horror of being killed, so he accepted the Star Cup's proposal and became the Star Cup's puppet. He was arranged to be next to Rick, and was ready to liberate the real Star Cup in the elf corridor. And when he saw Wu-Ming stop Rick's action of piercing through the Earth's core, the enslaved Canis directly attacked, snatching Rick's right hand and the desireless arm in his right hand. That was the truth that Wu-Ming saw through. What happened to the Star Cup? Wu-Ming grabbed Rick and healed him. Then, he frowned as he looked down at the ground that was already rotten beyond repair. The ground was completely destroyed, as if it was the epicenter of an earthquake. Originally, if Rick used the desireless arm, the energy of the desireless arm would only have a very small destructive power, but it would directly penetrate the Earth's core with a powerful penetrating force and make the Star Cup appear. However, the desireless arm technique used by Canis was quite crude. Not only had a portion of the energy leaked out, but it had also caused damage to the surface of the Earth. Furthermore, it hadn't reached the core of the Earth, so it could be said that it was quite a waste. However, since the other party was a god, ordinary judgment could not be used as a reference. Wu-Ming frowned as he looked at the black cup-shaped crystal slowly rising from the ground that was still being destroyed. That was undoubtedly the Star Cup. However, there was indeed a huge problem with the Star Cup. The Star Cup shouldn't be black in shape, but a pure white and transparent cup-shaped crystal. Apart from that, Wu Ming also sensed a familiar aura, which originated from the black mud. I didn't expect that even this world would have this black mud, Wu Ming said solemnly as he looked at the black mud that was swaying inside the black crystal like black paste. Wu Ming said with a solemn expression, I should have known. How could a normal person's voice reach my ears in the spacetime tunnel? Only the black mud, which also has the power of the origin, could transmit that voice to my ears. Wu Ming's analysis was correct. The reason why Wu Ming could hear Rick's sigh in the beginning was all because of the black mud. The black mud was deliberately hidden in the elven corridor that was full of elves, so Wu Ming's perception couldn't take effect for a while, so he didn't sense the presence of the black mud. After attracting Wu Ming to this world, the star cup that was possessed by the black mud began to plan its escape as if it had its own consciousness. It punished Artu who resisted it, controlled Kanas who accepted it, seized Rick's right hand, and successfully liberated the star cup from the elven corridor. I was tricked. Wu Ming wasn't too angry. This was the power of wisdom. Wu Ming was quite impressed. Even Wu Ming didn't expect a star cup that had just developed its own consciousness to be so calculative. Let's leave here first, Rick. You'll only be a burden if you stay here, Wu Ming said to Rick, whose right arm had stopped bleeding. Rick looked at Wu Ming seriously, then nodded. He knew his own limit. Then, Wu Ming opened the portal and sent Rick in. Before he left, Rick reminded Wu Ming, Thank you very much for your help, Lord God. I wish you all the best. With that, Rick threw himself into the black portal. Then, the portal closed. Wu Ming looked at the star cup's position. Just like a strange phenomenon, the liquid in the star cup flowed out directly and wrapped around the star cup to form a human figure. Then, the human figure took shape and appeared in front of Wu Ming. 18 pairs of white wings, Western clothing that resembled a Greek style, sharp eyes, and a muscular body. There was no doubt that this human figure was the god of war, Artu, who had just died not long ago. However, Wu Ming wasn't stupid enough to think that this fake guy in front of him was Artu. Although the appearance was the same, the aura was completely different. Oh, are you the dragon of origin? What a familiar stranger, Artu said in a frivolous tone. There was no doubt that this wasn't Artu. It's all thanks to you that I could come out so quickly, Artu, who was formed by the star cup's consciousness, said. If it weren't for Wu Ming, it would have taken a year and a half for the star cup to come out. After all, even in the final battle, Rick had to use other means to penetrate the core. Without Wu Ming, this time would have been delayed. You know what you are, don't you? Wu Ming looked at the fake Artu in front of him seriously. Of course. I'm the star cup's consciousness. I'm just a tool, an item. I belong to whoever wins the battle, the star cup's consciousness said frivolously, using Arthu's appearance. This annoyed Wu Ming. It was an insult to the dead. But thanks to this, I have my own consciousness. The star cup's consciousness smiled proudly. Then, it raised one of its hands, and countless black substances appeared on its hand. This was the black origin soil that Wu Ming was familiar with. If it's you, you must recognize this as well. This thing tells me that you're an enemy. The star cup's consciousness smiled at Wu Ming. Wu Ming closed his eyes, then let out a long breath. This was a little troublesome. Wu Ming had thought about what would happen if the big shots of each world were swallowed by the black origin soil. Although Xingque wasn't considered a big shot, Xingque had developed a consciousness after being corroded by the origin black mud that came out of nowhere. However, this was nothing. In the hands of a good person, the black origin soil was a good thing. In the hands of an evil person, the black origin soil was an evil thing. The consciousness born by the star cup was something similar to the world's consciousness. However, these people or things affected by the black origin soil would regard Wu Ming as an enemy. Just like Xiao Ming, who traveled to various worlds but was regarded as a world destroyer. The star cup's consciousness and Wu Ming had a hostile relationship. In short, Only one of us can live. Wu Ming looked at the Star Cup's consciousness. There's no other way. My heart tells me that I have to kill you. Chapter 448. Then, let's cut the crap and get started. As soon as Wu Ming finished speaking, the magic power in his body erupted, creating a strong hurricane that blew against the land that was already damaged beyond repair. The huge magical power directly caused the sky and earth to change. Large dark clouds formed a cloud tornado that slowly floated above Wu Ming's head. I will deny the sky, deny the earth, the storm will destroy everything, and the rain will cover everything. With this supreme divine power, I will make everything in heaven and earth bow down to me. Wu Ming raised one hand and pointed to the sky. As he chanted, the huge cloud tornado in the sky began to roar along with the hurricane, forming a tornado that could tear steel. Ha! Wu Ming shouted and swung his raised arm down heavily. In an instant, a gigantic tornado followed Wu Ming's hand and smashed toward Artemis, who was formed by the consciousness of the Star Cup. Rumble! The tornado collided with the earth and burst out like a big explosion, instantly filling the air with smoke and dust. Whoosh! A winged silhouette flew out of the smoke. It was the Star Cup's consciousness that was using Artethu's appearance. Artemigio, who rushed out of the smoke and dust, was in a mess, as if he had rolled several times on the ground. However, although he looked embarrassed, Wu Ming was sure that he did not hurt Artemigio. I didn't expect you to have such powerful power. You really deserve to be called the Root Dragon. Artemigio looked at Wu Ming with admiration. I still have a lot of tricks up my sleeve. I'm afraid you won't be able to enjoy them. Wu Ming also looked at Artemigio. Now, half of Wu Ming's 12 avatars could not be used because of the previous battle and various other things. Wu Ming used Gargantuan to attack Artemigio and destroyed his heart. Sun collided with Artemigio's Sky Strike. Flood and Annihilation were used to offset the aftermath of Wu Ming and Artemigio's ultimate move. Wu Ming used Phoenix to save Rick. It could be said that Wu Ming's usual abilities were basically unusable for the time being. However, the remaining 7 avatars were not his usual abilities, and it was enough to make Artemigio suffer. Dragon Seed, Warrior, Vitality, Storm, Ally, Thunder God, and Sorcerer. In addition to Dragon Seed, Vitality, Sorcerer, and Sorcerer, which were semi-passive abilities, whether it was Warrior, Storm, or Thunder God, their power was immeasurable. However, I, who has obtained Artemigio's body, is not to be trifled with. Artemigio's face instantly became ferocious, and then Artemigio's body rushed straight toward Wu Ming. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. Now I will have the majesty of 10 mountains, the power of 100 rivers, and the strength of 1,000 dragons. The majestic me will raise the fierce mark of the dragon seed. After Wu Ming finished chanting, the stone plate with the dragon carved on it suddenly lit up in his heart at 1 o'clock. Then, Wu Ming's body suddenly agitated, and Wu Ming's body became bigger, and he also faced Artemigio's consciousness. Boom! Wu Ming and Artemigio's consciousness collided, making a loud noise, and the whole land made a miserable sound. It could be said that now, in the southwest of Yar-Ala, the place where Wu Ming and Artemigio's consciousness fought was almost sinking. More than 1,000 meters of smoke and dust filled the air. Then, along with the sweeping of a hurricane, the surrounding dust dissipated, and Artemigio's consciousness lowered its arm that released the hurricane. As expected of the Root Dragon. To think that you can contend against me in such a situation. The consciousness of the Star Cup that was using Artethu's appearance showed a rare serious expression instead of the frivolous expression it had before. You're not only using Artemigio's appearance, but you're also using his abilities, right? Wu Ming's voice sounded from the surrounding dust. Wu Ming sensed that the other party was using the same move as Artemigio. If it weren't for the fact that Wu Ming clearly knew that the other party was Artemisia's consciousness, perhaps he would have thought that Artemisio and Wu Ming were fighting. Of course, Artemisio is dead and has returned to the elf corridor. I happen to need a strong body, and it's all thanks to you that you were able to kill Artemisio. After the death of a living species in that world, they would return to the elf corridor. It felt like hell, but it was not quite the same. After Artemisio disappeared, he came to the elf corridor. As a result, Artemisio was swallowed by Artemisio's consciousness in the elf corridor. Wu Ming even suspected that Artemisio's spirit essence had been invaded by Artemisio's body. After being rejected, Artemisio's spirit essence was pulled out. Although it seemed to be placed there, in fact, Wu Ming felt that Artemisio's spirit essence was a means to pave the way for Artemisio's body. As Artemisio's consciousness, it didn't have a physical body, so it could only find a body that matched its identity, which was the body of a divine seed. That was why Artemisio's consciousness could use the defective product that was more powerful than the real one. That was because of Artemisio's power and the power of the root black mud. And the most important thing was Wu Ming's current incarnation, Dragon Seed. A huge, both ferocious and wholly white dragon claw stretched out of the smoke, giving the feeling that it could kill Artemisio with just a light squeeze. The huge figure in the smoke shook, and in an instant, a huge white dragon appeared in front of Artemisio's consciousness. That was the power of Dragon Seed, which could turn him into a real fantasy breed dragon. The current Wu Ming was different from his previous incarnation. Originally, the dragon that Wu Ming transformed into was just a kind of dragon in name, but in fact, it was not a dragon. It was just like the golden wolf Bio in the Night of the Sorcerer. It was a wolf, but it was not a wolf. In addition, Wu Ming's dragon seed incarnation had undergone various baptisms for a long time, and the dragon that he transformed into was no longer an ordinary fantasy breed. At least, it was at the level of the fantasy breed king. "Feel the power of my incarnation," Wu Ming shouted, and then Wu Ming's huge dragon claw slapped Artemisio's consciousness. At the same time, Artemisio's body, which was controlled by Artemisio's consciousness, frowned a little uncomfortably. Although Artemisio's body could not be seriously injured, it was still the strongest war god so far. Artemisio's physical ability could fight with Wu Ming bare-handed in his current state. Wu Ming now understood why the other party had sealed Arthas's god essence in the throne of the war god temple. Arthas had probably died so that the Star Cup's consciousness could take over his place. This was also part of the other party's plan. "I'll let you have a taste of the power of war god in his strongest state." Artemisio's consciousness roared and slammed into Wu Ming's dragon claw. Boom! Chapter 449. In the southwest corner of the continent of Yar Ayla, what was originally a wasteland had turned into a broken wetland with water constantly flowing in. The reason why the water entered the ground was because the battle between Wu Ming and the consciousness of the Star Cup that was using Arthas' body had caused 2, 3, 4, 5 damages to the ground that was originally penetrated by Desireless Arm. Above the wetland, 2 figures, one big and one small, quickly passed through the sky. They were Wu Ming, who transformed into a dragon, and Artrius, who was controlled by Star Cup. At present, Wu Ming was chasing after Artrius. Wu Ming raised his huge dragon mouth, aimed at the white figure in front of him, and condensed a platinum flame in his mouth, and then he blasted it out. Boom! The flame that seemed to be able to burn everything flew in the air at an extremely fast speed, and the air seemed to be burned, bursting out with a loud explosion. Whoosh! The consciousness of the Star Cup hurriedly dodged, and the exploding white flame directly passed by it and landed on the ground. Boom! A small mushroom cloud rose into the air, setting off a violent hurricane. Star Cup's consciousness was not to be outdone. It pointed at Wu Ming with both hands, and 2 condensed sky-strike energy beams were blasted toward Wu Ming. Wu Ming's huge body at the moment was not suitable for dodging, and Wu Ming was not prepared to do so. Boom! Boom! Wu Ming's 2 huge white dragon claws slapped the 2 incoming sky-strike energy beams, and the 2 sky-strike energy beams were directly sent flying. The energy pillar became like a hard object instead of an energy that would explode upon contact. It was sent flying by Wu Ming. Boom! The sky-strike energy beams, like Wu Ming's white flame, fell heavily to the ground and burst out with a roar, accompanied by a whistling hurricane, and 2 small mushroom clouds rose slowly. Now, it was almost possible to understand why the battle between the 2 could destroy the southwestern part of the continent of Yar Ayla into a wetland that was close to a new lake and ocean. Gaia couldn't withstand an ordinary attack even if it was a nuclear attack. Wu Ming used his Dragon Seed avatar and fought with Star Cup's consciousness for a few minutes. In just a few minutes, the southwest of Yar Ayla was destroyed like this. Whether it was Wu Ming in his Dragon Seed avatar state, or Artreus, who was controlled by Star Cup's consciousness, it could be seen that those 2 were not ordinary at the moment. First of all, Artreus's body and ability was controlled by Star Cup's consciousness. It could be said that Artreus was completely different from when he fought with Wu Ming. Well, he was not the same person. Previously, Arthu's spirit essence had been sucked out by the Star Cup. No matter how strong he was, he wouldn't be that strong. But now, the Star Cup's consciousness that was using Arthu's body was able to fully display the strongest ability of the war god Artu. Not only could he use Heavenly Strike at will, but he also had the assistance of Star Cup and Black Root Mud, so his energy was unlimited, and his physical strength was also extremely strong. He could fight with Wu Ming in his Dragon Seed avatar state for a while. It was worth mentioning here that Wu Ming and Star Cup's consciousness were fighting in close combat before. However, Star Cup's consciousness found that its attack couldn't cause any significant damage to Wu Ming, so it became a long-range battle in the air. That was because of Wu Ming's first avatar, Dragon Seed avatar. Originally, this avatar only gave Wu Ming the ability of a top-level fantasy-type dragon, as well as an extremely powerful body and the ability to kill dragons. However, whether it was the dragon or the powerful body, Wu Ming's original body was stronger than this avatar. That was why Wu Ming didn't often or basically didn't use this avatar. It was only useful against dragon agents, but the chance of encountering a dragon was too small, and the chance of encountering an enemy related to a dragon was too small. In that case, wouldn't this incarnation be of little value? The answer must be no. Let's digress first. In theory, the God Slayer won't lose. The God Slayer was a creature that could win even when the winning rate was only 0.001%, and even in a battle where there was no chance of winning, it could still find a way to win. Of course, that was only in theory. If the God Slayer really didn't lose, then there wouldn't be Wu Ming defeating Marquis Warban, Salvatore, Luo Hao, and so on, and there wouldn't be the last king slaughtering the ancient God Slayer. The main reason was that the God Slayer had infinite possibilities, and because of that, none of the God's powers seized by the God Slayer were useless. The God Slayer's power could be continuously developed by the God Slayer, unlike the fixed usage in the game. For example, Salvatore Anthony had the power to regress the technology in a circle centered around him. In the sphere of influence of that power, electrical appliances would be inexplicably cut off, mobile phones would be unusable, and vehicles such as cars and ships would be completely paralyzed. That was because Salvatore didn't use that ability much, and he didn't develop it much. If that ability was a little more ruthless, the technology would regress tens of thousands of years and cover the entire Earth, then the Earth would be finished in less than a few minutes. Therefore, no one should underestimate any power. After Wu Ming studied the Dragon Seed's power, he came up with some ideas. Dragon Seed's avatar was evolved from Camel's avatar, Mechal's dragon-slaying ability, and Wu Ming's original body, the Dragon of Origin. Camel's super physique, Mechal's dragon-slaying ability, Wuming's dragon-slaying ability, and the Dragon of Origin's dragon-slaying ability led to this avatar being able to transform Wuming into a dragon-slaying dragon, and it was a huge fantasy breed with super physique and defense. Although Wuming was regarded as a disobedient god in the world of the god slayers, because of Wuming's particularity, he was regarded as half a god slayer after slaying a god. As the Dragon of Origin, he had infinite miracles. Wuming could naturally evolve his avatar. Some people might ask why that avatar looked like a simplified version of the Dragon of Origin that was closest to Wuming's original body. That was not wrong. Because Wuming's original body had been unable to leave the Dragon of Origin, Wuming prepared such an avatar for that reason. It could be said that except for the time and space ability, which was not as strong as the original Dragon of Origin, it was basically comparable to the original Dragon of Origin. The reason why it was the original Dragon of Origin was because of Wuming's current situation. Wuming, who was born from the root and absorbed the power of the root, could become stronger as long as he stayed in the root, and Wuming was still in the Dragon of Origin. There was no doubt that Wuming's original body had become very strong. However, the enemy happened to be Wuming's Dragon of Origin, the Black Mud. That thing and Wuming restrained each other. It could be said that if there were enough of them, it would not be a problem to kill Wuming. Unfortunately, if there were such a huge number of them, then all the worlds would have been destroyed long ago. Because such a huge number could have swallowed all the worlds, it was precisely because there was a strange existence that could restrain Wuming and was restrained by Wuming that Wuming did not dare to go out of the Dragon of Origin casually. If a large number of black mud accidentally invaded the Dragon of Origin, Wuming would not be able to break in no matter what. Just like how the black mud attacked Wuming when he was inside the Dragon of Origin, Wuming was inside the Dragon of Origin and was supported by the power of the Dragon of Origin, so he easily destroyed the black mud. If a large number of black mud invaded the Dragon of Origin, it would be really troublesome. Fortunately, the black mud had been distributed. If Wuming had returned to the Dragon of Origin, it was very likely that Wuming would be dead by now. Well, luck was also a part of one's strength. Returning to the main topic, the huge white dragon was still chasing after the Star Cup's consciousness. Wuming's persistent pursuit made the Star Cup's consciousness feel rather helpless and was on the verge of tears. Chapter 450. The reason why Star Cup's consciousness was being chased by Wuming was because Star Cup's consciousness couldn't break through the white dragon scales on Wuming's body after using Dragon Seed. The white dragon scales on Wuming's body weren't hard. Instead, they were quite tough. When Arthur's attack landed on them, it was like punching cotton. It wasn't very effective. It wasn't that Star Cup's consciousness couldn't break through Wuming's defense. If Wuming just stood there and let it hit him, it would be fine, but Wuming's claws were not to be trifled with, not to mention that he also had other magic spells. Don't forget that after using Dragon Seed Incarnation, Wuming's strength was comparable to Wuming's body before entering the big source. The root dragon's body was no joke. Therefore, Star Cup's consciousness had only one way, and that was to distance itself from Wuming. The consciousness of the Star Cup pulled away from Wu Ming and compressed the Sky Strike and even the God Strike into its palm, presenting a compressed attack. Naturally, Wu Ming's scales were just decorations. That was also the reason why Wuming chased after Star Cup's consciousness. Because Wuming also knew that was why he kept chasing after it, which led to the current situation. It could be said that if either Wuming or Star Cup's consciousness made a mistake, they would suffer a fatal blow. That was the reason why mistakes between masters could be fatal. Damn it! Can't you stop chasing me? Star Cup's consciousness said angrily. Then, Artesius's body merged into space and disappeared. Wuming, on the other hand, used his perception to find the place where Artesius appeared through the characteristics of space and time. Although the characteristics of space and time were very weak in the dragon seed incarnation state, it was enough for Wuming to catch up with Star Cup's consciousness again. When Star Cup's consciousness controlled Artesius's body to come out of space, Wuming was about to touch it again. Star Cup's consciousness had no choice but to continue running. And why did it not come out directly after merging into space? Maybe it was because of the root black mud, which made it subconsciously not run away. That was also the reason why Wuming said that only one of them could survive. It was like a battle between old enemies. Although it was very frustrating and weak, it couldn't escape. Do you think I'll let you go when I've already revealed my true form? Wuming teased the consciousness of the Star Cup. If Wuming didn't use the Dragon Seed, or if Wuming didn't use Dragon Seed, Star Cup's consciousness would probably leave this world directly. Wuming's consciousness only had power on this planet's body. Wuming might not come back, thinking that it was better to avoid trouble. Although Wuming promised Artesius to take care of his skywing species, Wuming reckoned that they would very likely return to Artesius after seeing Star Cup's consciousness using Artesius's body. After all, although Artesius had entrusted the skywing species to Wuming, no creature would follow a new master wholeheartedly. In that case, Wuming would have to wait until he dealt with the mastermind behind the burning of humanity before he came back to solve this small problem. But then again, this Star Cup's consciousness is really just a consciousness. Wuming began to mock Star Cup's consciousness. The expression of Star Cup's consciousness, who was using Artesius's body, also changed. This meant that Wuming was right. Although Wuming had fought with this Star Cup's consciousness more than a dozen times, the other party did not have any special abilities and had been using Artesius's ability the entire time. Logically speaking, the Star Cup represented the sovereignty of this planet. Holding the Star Cup meant that it was the master of this planet, which was the so-called only God. In that case, shouldn't the consciousness born from the Star Cup be in existence like Gaia? This was also why Wuming had used the Dragon Seed when he fought with the other party. It was because only with this clone did Wuming have the confidence to fight against such a super powerhouse. In the end, Wuming discovered that the other party was not really an existence similar to the suppression power Gaia. It was just a consciousness. It could only use the Star Cup's power to sneak attack Artesius. In other aspects, it still needed to rely on someone else's body to move. Did this not prove that the other party was actually bluffing? If it's really as I think, all you can do now is use Artesius's ability. Wuming narrowed his eyes at the other party. In that case, Wuming also began to suspect that this consciousness did not belong to the Star Cup. I have to admit, Wuming, your intelligence is not lower than mine. The Star Cup's consciousness that was using Artesius's body continued to fly. While dodging Wuming's attacks, it said in a dull tone, "It should be because you can't use the power of this world that you exposed yourself." Wuming was still following behind the Star Cup's consciousness. He would not stop attacking just because he had a conversation with the other party. You're right. I'm indeed just a consciousness. Without a body, I can't move as I wish. That's why I wanted to instigate Artesius, the most powerful war god. Then, the Star Cup's consciousness became happy. However, I didn't expect him to be such a blockhead. He knew that he would die, but he didn't accept the power. That's just as well. I've helped him by taking out his spirit essence. The Star Cup's consciousness showed a proud expression. This made Wuming even more displeased. I'm sure Artesius's soul in the elf corridor is angry that you're using his body. As he spoke, Wuming had already started to gather flames in his mouth. Like a heat ray, a fire dragon rushed toward the Star Cup's consciousness. The Star Cup's consciousness was still controlling Artesius's body to dodge. However, because it was a fire ray that was connected to Wuming's mouth, the Star Cup's consciousness had a hard time dodging. Then, it was grazed by Wuming's white flame. Kaboom! The space fluctuated violently. The other party escaped into space. The remaining flames swept across the ground, or rather, the ground that had turned into a sea made a series of explosions. Due to the excessive power, Wu-Ming had already distanced himself from the Star Cup's consciousness after he stopped shooting the flames. Ha ha ha! You've finally fallen for it, Wu-Ming, the Star Cup's consciousness said proudly. I didn't show it earlier. Insulting Artesius while using his body was enough to make Wu-Ming slightly angry. It used this to provoke Wu-Ming so that Wu-Ming could not stop the flames in time. In other words, Wu-Ming had used a skill that required a long time to cast. At the same time, the Star Cup's consciousness controlled Artesius to gather a thin light needle with unknown energy in its hand. It was a divine strike that was even more condensed and mixed with the power of origin. You can condense the divine strike to such a degree? Wu-Ming was shocked. Although he had expected Wu-Ming to use the divine strike that was mixed with the power of origin to attack Wu-Ming, Wu-Ming did not expect it to be able to condense the divine strike to such a degree. If it was the divine strike, Wu-Ming's scales would not be able to block it. This is my advantage as the Star Cup's consciousness and the origin black soil, the Star Cup's consciousness said proudly. Goodbye, Dragon of Origin! The Star Cup's consciousness shouted and threw the divine strike at Wu-Ming. The divine strike needle thrown by Artesius' body was quite fast. Wu-Ming, who could not use Phoenix for the time being, could not dodge it. The divine strike needle was aimed at Wu-Ming's brain. It had to be said that the Star Cup's consciousness was quite high. If it pierced through his heart, Wu-Ming would definitely not die. However, if it pierced through his brain, even if he did not die, he would fall into a coma. In this way, Wu-Ming would become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. However, it did not matter what the Star Cup's attack was because Wu-Ming was prepared to defend against any kind of attack. No, he could steal it. With a flash of golden light, Wu-Ming flew into the sky unscathed. The Star Cup's consciousness looked at Wu-Ming in disbelief. How is this possible? Chapter 451. The heaven and earth anomaly that was triggered by the divine striker needle just now gradually disappeared along with the disappearance of the divine striker needle. The sky became gloomy again. Because the sky was gloomy to begin with, and because it was night time, the sky seemed even gloomier at this moment. Logically speaking, the divine striker needle released by the Star Cup's consciousness should have hit Wu-Ming. However, the divine striker needle disappeared after a flash of golden light, and Wu-Ming was completely fine. Checkmate! Wu-Ming took advantage of the Star Cup's consciousness shock and flapped his huge wings as he charged toward it. The Star Cup's consciousness quickly recovered from the shock and quickly retreated. He was prepared to use his spatial ability to escape into space and get away from Wu-Ming again. He must still have some trump card. The disappearance of the divine striker needle must be related to the opponent's trump card. I don't believe that trump card can be used continuously. If there's another chance, he'll be done for. The Star Cup's consciousness thought as he looked at the huge dragon shadow that was approaching him and smiled proudly. As long as it was not the end, the victor was not certain. Then he was caught by Wu-Ming's dragon claws. Bam! Wu-Ming's body, which was controlled by the Star Cup's consciousness, made a sound that resembled the sound of metal colliding. Clank! Then, the sound of chains could be heard. Golden ripples appeared out of thin air, and a golden chain that seemed to have infinite length extended from it and firmly bound the Star Cup's consciousness in Wu-Ming's hand. This way, with the heaven lock that was baptized by the origin black mud in the body controlled by the Star Cup's consciousness could not come out. How is this possible? How can I not use my spatial ability? The Star Cup's consciousness said in a panic. After a moment of panic, the Star Cup's consciousness also discovered the problem. Now that he casually looked around, the space around him was filled with tactics that he had never seen before. These tactics covered the surrounding space and extended into the distance. These tactics seemed to have locked the space and were firmly attached to it. Although they were separated by a few meters, an invisible force linked them together. As a result, the surrounding space, or rather, the space in the southwest of the Yar-Ala continent, was locked by these tactics. In short, the space that originally allowed free passage was blocked, or rather blocked. Why do you think I've been chasing you in this place in the southwest of the Yar-Ala continent instead of going to other places? Wuming said to the Star Cup's consciousness that was struggling in his claws. Although the chase between the two only took place in the southwest part of the destroyed Yar-Ala continent, it was still not over yet. Firstly, Wuming had purposely trapped Star Cup's consciousness in this place. Secondly, this planet was its palace to Star Cup's consciousness. If it could deal with the enemy in one room, it would naturally not affect the entire palace. After all, no one would choose a plan with less benefits, and the consciousness of the Star Cup was the same. I've been waiting for this moment to come, Wuming said in a final tone. The heavy rain of Star Cup's consciousness fell into the fishing net that Wuming had set up for a long time. Wuming had set up a space lock tactic in the space, and Star Cup's consciousness did not leave this area. In the end, the space lock tactic in the southwest part of the Yar-Ala continent formed a link and formed a magic circle. The magic circle tightly locked the space in the area where Wuming and Star Cup's consciousness were. In mathematical terms, it was 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals infinity. If it was only a single tactic or multiple tactics, Star Cup's consciousness could use Arthas's physical ability to use the spatial ability to escape. However, the space lock in the southwest part of the Yar-Ala continent had already been formed. In addition to the binding of the Heaven Lock, Star Cup's consciousness could forget about escaping. Impossible? As Star Cup's consciousness, how could I not discover these tactics that you've set up? Although Star Cup's consciousness did not have much combat power, Star Cup's consciousness could be said to be unprecedentedly powerful in terms of perception, investigation, and so on. No matter what, it was still the consciousness of the planet's sovereign key. Naturally, its spiritual power should be able to detect these tactics. Due to anger, Star Cup's consciousness used its spiritual power to scan the tactic. In the end, it discovered something unusual. The tactics were originally hidden. This was something that both Wuming and Star Cup's consciousness knew. Now, these tactics were revealed because they had been activated. Other than that, when Star Cup's consciousness scanned these tactics, it discovered that there were other tactics mixed in with these space lock tactics. It was because of these other tactics that Star Cup's consciousness did not notice the existence of these space lock tactics. Those are tactics that can block perception? Star Cup's consciousness was completely shocked. That's right. There were some shielding tactics mixed in with the space lock tactics. These shielding tactics were like the space lock tactics. They were linked together and formed a magic circle. It was these shielding tactics magic circles combined with the space lock tactics magic circle that caused Star Cup's consciousness to be captured by Wuming. Even if it's you, it's impossible for you to have a tactic that can block my perception. As the planet's sovereign key's consciousness, it was impossible for its spiritual power not to notice anything. Also, why did my divine firing needle disappear? How many trump cards are you hiding? Star Cup's consciousness seemed to have gone crazy at the moment. It gave off a feeling that it was at the end of its road and would definitely die. However, Wuming did not say anything else. You don't need to know about this. Return obediently and apologize to Arthas. As Wuming spoke, a trace of lightning and wind appeared on the dragon claw that was holding the Star Cup's consciousness, as well as an invisible source of power. After all, Star Cup's consciousness that had the origin black soil had to be dealt with using origin power. Sizzle sizzle! Lightning crackled. Countless divine lightning surged out of Wuming's body. Whoosh whoosh! The raging storm was mixed in with the thunder and lightning. Two different forces converged on Wuming's dragon claw that was holding Star Cup's consciousness. No! You can't do this. I am Star Cup's consciousness. I can help you gain control of this planet. Star Cup's consciousness seemed to be aware of its death and frantically begged for mercy. On the contrary, Wuming felt a bit strange. Arthas was a wise man. Other than that, Wuming didn't think that destroying Arthas' body would kill it. Boom! Wuming didn't waste any more time and directly crushed the clone's body with the power of Thunder God's avatar and Storm's avatar. The voice of Star Cup's consciousness stopped abruptly. Wuming looked at Star Cup that was revealed and looked at it vigilantly. He constantly scanned it with his spiritual power, but he didn't find the existence of Star Cup's consciousness. Is it really dead? Wuming wondered. Of course, it wasn't that simple. In the distance, the current capital of the Forest Elves, Temple of Canas. In the Temple of Canas, where the Forest Elves worshipped, with a stream of light, a green figure with burning flames appeared. Chapter 452. Damn it! Dragon of Origin! The green figure said viciously as he sat weakly in his own temple. This figure was the forest god Canas who had taken Rick's right arm. However, his tone was rather strange. If Wuming was here, he would definitely recognize this tone. This was Canas, who had just been destroyed by Wuming and replicated by Arthas' body. Arthas had rejected the Star Cup. In order to ensure that he could come out of the Earth's core, the Star Cup's consciousness chose another god, which was Canas. The Star Cup's consciousness used the Star Cup's power to erase Canas' personality and then took control of Canas' body. However, unlike replicating Arthas' body, the Star Cup's consciousness simply controlled it and did not integrate itself into it. This was also why Canas, who had taken Rick's body by surprise, was expressionless. After that, when Wuming was fighting with the Star Cup's consciousness, in order to not let Canas escape, Wuming used his familiar authority that he had not used for a long time. When he killed Neza in the God Slayer world, Neza wanted to continue fooling around and did not want to return to the myths, so he turned into Wuming's authority, which was a familiar with self-awareness. Then, Wuming released Neza to stop Canas. Canas, who had temporarily lost the control of the Star Cup's consciousness, was judged to automatically attack the enemy, so he fought with Neza. Simply put, it's hanging up the phone, for all. Then, because the battle between Wuming and the Star Cup's consciousness was too intense, Canas and Neza were blown away and continued to fight in the center of the Yar-Ala continent. The burn marks on her body were left by Neza, so using the fire-tipped spear to deal with the forest god was the most appropriate choice. Then, when Wuming crushed Arthas' body that the Star Cup's consciousness had replicated, the Star Cup's consciousness that controlled Canas' body escaped. However, the real result was that the Star Cup's consciousness came to Canas' body and completely took control of her body. It could be said that the Star Cup's consciousness begging for mercy was purely an act for Wuming to see. Its purpose was to make Wuming think that the Star Cup's consciousness was really dead. After all, even Wuming had praised the Star Cup's consciousness as a wise one. In terms of hypostasis, the Star Cup's consciousness should be half a level of suppression, so of course it would not be so weak. Although it had been a noob for a long time. Although Forest God's body's body, it's not weak, I'll just make do with it. After all, the Forest God was a master of 186 spells. He could cast 186 types of spells at the same time. He was one of the best among the gods. Because Canas the Star Cup's consciousness, Canas's consciousnesses as well. He can't control the Star Cup anyway, so I don't need to be in a hurry. Once I recover, I'll touch the Star Cup and use Canas' body to become the only god. Because the Star Cup's consciousness previously controlled Arthas' body was a defective copy of the Star Cup's consciousness, it could not be recognized as a god by the Star Cup's consciousness. Therefore, the Star Cup's consciousness was not the only god. The reason it did not directly use Cana's body to become the only god was because Cana's body was too weak. Moreover, the Star Cup's consciousness thought that it could defeat Wuming. In the end it failed. Although I'm now free from the Star Cup, Arthas is dead. As long as this body is fine, the final victor will still be me. After all, Wuming was not qualified to become the only god on this planet. Other than Arthas and Wuming, the Star Cup's consciousness did not care about the other gods. They're just a bunch of fools who don't know how to use their wisdom. They're nothing to worry about. The Star Cup's consciousness laughed when it thought of the other gods. Even those who were called gods were a bunch of simple-minded people who only knew how to flaunt their innate abilities. Now that the Star Cup has fallen into his hands, for safety's sake, I'd better stay in this body obediently and wait for him to leave, the Star Cup's consciousness said. After all, we can't use the Star Cup. For the sake of humans, he would not take the Star Cup away. He would definitely leave the Star Cup for the humans. However, Wuming did not know that humans could not use the Star Cup either. I really want to see his expression when he finds out that humans can't use the Star Cup. It'll be very interesting, the Star Cup's consciousness said with a smile. Then, the Star Cup's consciousness controlled Cana's body and destroyed the statue of Cana's that was used for worship with magic. It sat on the platform of the statue and began to repair the body. Cana's body was like a vacuum cleaner that was turned on to its maximum capacity. It could be seen with the naked eye that Cana's body was madly absorbing the spirits in the air. Not only was its spirit injured by Wuming, but its body was also injured by Neza. Therefore, the Star Cup's consciousness needed to recuperate. Now, Cana's body was an existence that would burp if it was hit by the Void's Zeroth ward or marrow explosion. Therefore, the Star Cup's consciousness needed to heal the injuries of this body. As a natural god, Cana's and other god species naturally had an advantage. As long as they absorbed the spirits in the air, they would be able to slowly recover from their injuries. After all, there was still someone in the outside world that was not to be trifled with. This place was the capital of the Forest Elves. The chances of someone breaking in were almost zero. Therefore, the Star Cup's consciousness could safely absorb the spirits to heal its injuries. Then, the Star Cup's consciousness that was absorbing the spirits suddenly realized that there was something wrong with these spirits. It was just like when you drank ordinary milk and realized that the milk tasted strange. Then, before the Star Cup's consciousness could react, Cana's body suddenly exploded. Bang! The explosion of Cana's body caused the entire temple of Cana's to collapse. The forest goblins and forest goblins who were guarding the outside were all in a panic. The temple of the god they worshipped was blown up, and that was a big deal. The temple had always been the place where the forest elves communicated with Cana's, but now it had exploded. This was no less than the collapse of the family's ancestral hall. It was a heavy blow to the people. As the forest elves panicked and tried to rescue them, Shinka Nilbar hid in a house not far from the temple and looked at the collapsed temple with cold eyes. Sucking in a fairy that was activated by my Zeroth ward of the Void, plus you're heavily injured. What a pity. Lord God, you're finally going to die by my hands. He. Xianku's expression darkened as she spoke, which made the girl behind her a little scared. This way we can be together, Nina, say? Senior. The girl, called Nina, looked at her senior nervously. Her body kept trembling. Perhaps she would be very lucky in the future. At the same time, Wuming, who was still checking the Star Cup, suddenly noticed that something was wrong with the Star Cup. You finally came out, Star Cup's consciousness. Chapter 453. Wuming looked at the tiny Xingqiu on his huge dragon claw and breathed a sigh of relief. Although he didn't know why he couldn't find it before, Wuming finally found Xingqiu's consciousness. I thought you really disappeared, but it turns out you were still hiding. After all, Wuming didn't believe that the death of a mere body could kill Xingchue's consciousness. Sure enough, after Wuming's perseverance, Xingchue's consciousness finally came out. Damn. Forest elves. Xingchue's consciousness said weakly. Previously, because Wuming destroyed its body, Xingchue's consciousness was weakened. This time, it was plotted against in the Temple of Canas, and now Xingchue's consciousness could no longer stay awake. The Star Cup's consciousness that absorbed the spirit to heal its injuries was like an 4-drip, but someone injected poison into the 4-drip, and all the absorbed spirit was detonated by the Zeroth Ward of Void. Canas was completely dead, and the Star Cup's consciousness returned to the Star Cup because it had nowhere to go. However, it really didn't expect that the forest elves would attack their creator, forest god Canas. Although Xingchue's consciousness didn't pay much attention to Canas, Canas was also an evil god, so why would someone want to kill her? All kinds of questions troubled Xingchue's consciousness, but now, Xingchue's consciousness didn't have time to think about other things. If it didn't solve the crisis in front of it, it would really die. Xingchue's consciousness didn't think that Wuming, who could mix a shielding technique into a space lock technique, wouldn't use a technique that targeted its spiritual body, which was its consciousness. Wait. I have something to say. Xingchue's consciousness, who knew that it was already at the end of the road, quickly said. Do you still want to say something? But I won't give you the chance. Wu Ming finally understood that the victor was the righteous one, while the villains died because they talked too much, laughing emoji. Goodbye. Immediately afterward, Wuming took advantage of the fact that his sorcerer avatar was still active and chanted the spell again. Noble and powerful, wise and kind. Thus, I shall become a miracle and lead the world to the dawn. In an instant, Wuming's inner stone plate, which represented the sorcerer's incarnation, turned red. A large amount of mana surged into the Star Cup. Then, in the silence of the Star Cup's consciousness, which had become even more muddled due to its weakened state, Wuming completely eliminated it. Although it was a bit anticlimactic, it's finally over. Wuming complained as he looked to the east. Just like what Wuming knew, the sun appeared from the east. At this time, Wuming just happened to catch the sunrise. Watching the sunrise, Wuming logged out of the Dragon Seed avatar. Wuming's gigantic dragon body slowly turned into the size of a human. He once again regained his black-haired, red-eyed, and cloaked appearance. Then, Wuming clutched his head in pain. Ugh! The burden is a little too much. The reason why he said that was because more than half of Wuming's 12 avatars were now in a state of overload. Overload's red alert state was not the end of it. It also caused damage to Wuming's spirit and body. After all, that avatar was not the real body, but a substitute made by Wuming. Previously, because of the battle with Artemis, Wuming caused his 2 avatars, the Titan and the Sun, to fall into a red alert state and temporarily could not be used. In order to eliminate the aftermath of the battle between the two, Wuming used the combination of Annihilation and Flood, and at the same time, those 2 avatars also fell into a red alert state. After all, if it was only Annihilation, it would not be able to reach the range, and if it was only Flood, it would not be able to eliminate the aftermath, so he had to combine the 2. Because Wuming's avatar could only use 1 avatar at a time, using 2 avatars together directly entered a red alert state. After that, in order to save Rick, Wuming's Phoenix was also unable to be used. Otherwise, Wuming wouldn't have to chase after Star Cup's consciousness, he could just use Phoenix to catch it. Fortunately, Wuming's avatar was not counted in the number of avatars he could use. Otherwise, Wuming would not be able to use other avatars the moment his avatar was on the ground. After that, Wuming used Dragon Seed to restore his body to a state where he could use multiple avatars for a short time. With that, Wuming secretly used Sorcerer's avatar to set up a space blockade and a space shielding technique. The reason why Star Cup's consciousness did not notice it was because Sorcerer's avatar's casting effect was enhanced. After that, because he needed to destroy Artemis's avatar that Star Cup's consciousness copied, Storm and Thunder God also fell into a red alert state for the time being. In addition to Warrior's avatar, Wuming had a total of 8 avatars in overload. Previously, Star Cup's consciousness provoked Wuming with words, which made Wuming angry, and then attacked Wuming with Firing Needle. At that time, Wuming used Warrior's avatar to seal Firing Needle. After all, Wuming was also a man who fought Artemis before, so he was very familiar with Firing Needle. Although Wu Ming's warrior avatar evolved from Welaslana's warrior avatar, unlike Welaslana's warrior avatar, he didn't need to chant to use it on the enemy, he only needed to know the knowledge to use it. However, because it was instantaneous, and because of the power of Firing Needle, Warrior's avatar also fell into overload. And Sorcerer's avatar also fell into overload because of Star Cup's consciousness just now. Now, Wuming only had 3 avatars left: Dragon Seed, Dependent, and Vitality. 9 avatars fell into overload. Because of that, Wuming felt very uncomfortable, both physically and mentally. After all, Wuming's mental power was quite strong, and he meditated every day. At that moment, he just felt a little tired. On the contrary, his physical body had some problems. Because this body was made, not only could it not allow Wuming to exert his full strength, but its physical strength was also far inferior to his original body. 9 of the 12 avatars fell into overload, and Wuming felt extremely painful. Looking at Star Cup in his hand, Wuming threw it casually, and golden ripples swallowed Star Cup. Then Wuming opened the portal, found a plane, and sat cross-legged. I'd better heal my injuries first. The reason why he didn't sit on the ground was because the battlefield just now had turned into an ocean. The one with the supreme divine power, the god protects him, the devil hates him, no enemy can get close to him, like a fountain of vitality that constantly surges, granting the world equal protection. As soon as Sorcerer's avatar finished speaking, the elves between heaven and earth began to surge, but Wuming did not absorb those elves. First of all, what Wuming needed was magical power, not elves. Second, those elves were alive. If possible, Wuming would not hurt them. In that way, Wuming closed his eyes and began to recover. And those elves wrapped around Wuming's body as if they were protecting him. A little bit of starlight danced with the divine person. Chapter 454. Vitality Avatar's Characteristic. If there is energy that can be absorbed, it will speed up the recovery speed. Even if there is no magical power in this world, there is only elves, but fortunately, Wuming's Vitality Avatar can heal Wuming's injuries without energy, so it's not a big deal at all. After almost an hour, Wuming's injuries were almost healed. Feeling his heart, Wuming found that the red color of the stone plate that entered the state of overload was fading little by little at this moment. It seems that Vitality Avatar can also relieve the overload of other avatars. Although this was the case, Wuming also stopped activating Vitality Avatar. At present, his physical and mental aspects are almost recovered, and there is no need to restore those avatars at this time. After all, Star Cup is still in my hands, I can't use it, and humans can't use it either. I have to think of a way. Star Cup's consciousness said before that Wuming can't become the only god of this planet, and he can't control Star Cup, and humans are the same. Although Wuming didn't think what Star Cup's consciousness told him was a lie, but to be on the safe side, Wuming still checked Star Cup after getting it. Wuming indeed can't control Star Cup, maybe because Wuming himself is not a native of this world. And as for whether humans can control Holy Cup, Wuming doesn't know. After all, Star Cup's consciousness said so. If humans are not recognized by Star Cup, it is likely that humans can't become the ruler of this planet, just like what Star Cup's consciousness said. Forget it, Let's take one step at a time. With that said, Wu-Ming withdrew from his inner world and opened his eyes. When Wu-Ming observed his inner stone plate, he sensed that some people came from the outside world, but because the other party was not malicious, Wu-Ming didn't care. However, it was not good to just leave those people alone, so he was ready to come out to meet them at this time. Then he was shocked by the scene in front of him. Ew! Wu-Ming opened his eyes and saw many little angels in front of him. Ahem! They were the infant version of Skywings, and a huge fantasy breed that looked like a floating island, Abendheim. Anyone who saw this scene would be given a fright. Nearly 10,000 Skywings were collectively kneeling on this vast plain. It was a spectacular sight. It was a good thing that Silent Cry had randomly chosen a plain. Otherwise, the Skywings would not have been able to collectively kneel here. Moreover, with Abendheim around, this plain seemed a little small. "Why are you here?" Wu-Ming subconsciously asked when he saw the Skywings half kneeling on the ground with their heads lowered. Although Wu-Ming sensed that someone was coming, he didn't expect there to be so many of them. When Wu-Ming didn't release his psychic power, he only maintained a vague sense of perception. Therefore, when Wu-Ming opened his eyes, he was shocked. Soon after, Azrael, who was at the front of the Skywings, answered Wu-Ming. "Lord Arthas has entrusted us to you. From now on, Lord Wu-Ming will be our new master," Azrael said expressionlessly but respectfully. As the first Skywing breed created by Arthas, Azrael was the equivalent of the big sister of the Skywings. Thus, with Arthas dead, Azrael was the leader. "That's true. Arthas has entrusted you all to me," Wu-Ming said and began to ponder. Wu-Ming did not know if the Skywing breed's personalities were like Arthas, where the strong were respected, but since Arthas was worried about his creations, Wu-Ming believed that although these Skywings had been entrusted to Wu-Ming by Arthas, they might not be calm on the inside. Having become the subordinates of the enemy who had killed their master, and having been entrusted to do so by their master, Wu-Ming did not believe that the Skywings could be as heartless as the Triumph breeds. Ahem. Although it wasn't very nice to say that about the Triumph breeds, aside from Shiobi, the rest of the Triumph breeds were truly heartless. Wu-Ming released his mental energy and probed the tens of thousands of Skywings in front of him, discovering some clues. Every Skywing breed had a sad expression on their faces, and Wu-Ming could tell that they wanted to commit suicide. The reason why they had been able to follow Azrael to Wu-Ming was very likely because they had to obey their master's final order. This was no good. Putting aside whether or not Wu-Ming would order them to do some missions, in this state, they might not be able to survive in battle. 90% of those whose hearts were already dead would die in that battle. The remaining 10% were those who were strong enough to survive even if they fought absent-mindedly. Instantly, Wu-Ming came up with a good idea. "Raise your heads, Skywings." Wu-Ming used his magic and softly said, but his voice still reached the ears of every Skywing breed. The Skywings raised their heads and expressionlessly looked at Wu-Ming. "Arthas is a worthy opponent, but the two of us have our reasons for fighting." Arthas was doing it for his lifelong wish, while Wu-Ming was doing it for Arthas not to snatch the Star Cup. In the end, Arthas's death could be considered an accident. Wu-Ming had not expected Arthas's spirit essence to be sealed into the throne by the Star Cup's consciousness. If Wu-Ming had really wanted to kill Arthas, he would not have used the power of the Flood and Annihilation to eliminate the aftermath of their battle. "I won't pretend to be polite with you. Arthas's death is truly an accident." When Wu-Ming said this, not only did the Skywings who had thoughts of committing suicide become angry, even the Skywings who wanted to obey Arthas's final order frowned, especially Azrael. "But I won't shirk my responsibility. I'll take on this responsibility and the task my friend Arthas entrusted to me." After all, the two of them had hit it off immediately after the battle. Regardless of whether Arthas died or not, the friendship between the two of them was inseparable. Have hope for the future. Don't give up on your lives because I'll always be waiting for you. I'll wait for you to challenge me until you kill me. Wuming's words caused an uproar among the Skywings. Even Abendheim was shaken. It was clear that he was not calm. You guys also want to avenge Arthas, right? As one of his murderers, you'll definitely choose to avenge him if you can. Wuming was like a demon, tempting the Skywings. I'll give you the right to challenge me. Live on and work hard to become stronger. Don't you guys have practically unlimited lifespans? Then, let your own blade be your lifelong goal. Almost every Skywing excitedly flapped their wings. Some really wanted to kill Wuming, while others were excited to be able to challenge an expert like Wuming. Azriel's eyes widened as she stared at her current master in shock. As the big sister, how could she not see that Wuming was giving the Skywings hope and a goal to live on? Apart from Azriel, quite a few of the more senior Skywings also saw Wuming's intentions. Perhaps letting him become the new master of the Skywings wasn't a bad idea. Afterward, the Skywings spoke in unison. As you command, my lord. Chapter 455. After that, Wuming brought the Skywing breeds back to Abandheim and began to use Abandheim's restoration technique to heal the Skywing breed. After using all their strength, the Skywing breeds would turn into a 10-year-old child and enter a weakened state. Wuming even suspected that Arthas was a Lulicon in this weakened state. The Skywing breed's combat strength would be greatly reduced. It could be said that even the weakest human in this world could kill a Skywing breed. In response to this, the Skywing species used a technique to develop a set of equipment specifically designed to speed up their recovery. After the Skywing breeds used up all their strength and turned into children, they would need about 50 years to recover to their original state. Of course, this number was under the condition that there was no external force, and the Skywing breeds relied on their own strength to recover. With the Skywing breeds' belligerent nature, they would not be able to fight freely for 50 years. However, this was how the restoration technique was created. Through a special technique, the Skywing breeds developed a device that could speed up the recovery of the Skywing breeds after using up all their strength. In just a few days, the Skywing breeds could completely recover what would take 50 years to recover. Not only that, but if they were heavily injured, they could also go to the restoration technique to recover. Simply put, it was like the spring in the game. However, because there were not many devices, they could only be used in batches. It would probably take several months for the nearly 10,000 Skywing breeds to recover. Wuming looked at the device in front of him. One by one, the Skywing breeds floated in the device, and the spirit around them accelerated into their bodies. Wuming had some ideas. The Skywing breeds shrank because they ran out of energy, and this device is used to speed up their absorption of spirit. So that's how it works, Wuming said after seeing through the mechanism of the device. Your judgment is correct, Sir Wuming. This is the mechanism of our Skywing breed's restoration technique. Meow Azriel, who had been following Wuming, said with a strange tone. Wuming looked at Azriel with a strange expression. Why didn't Azriel use the word meow before, but now? Could it be that she had forgotten because she was too sad? Wuming thought as he looked at Azriel. Master Wuming, what's wrong? Meow. Azriel stared at Wuming with her big cute eyes and asked curiously. No, nothing. Wuming shook his head. Wuming felt that if he continued to ask, it might be very bad, so he didn't ask. It was just a habit. By the way, Azriel, come with me. Wuming turned and walked towards a corner behind him. Meow? Is Lord Wuming going to attack me? For my sisters, I'm willing to go through fire and water today. Meow. Azriel instantly acted as if she was about to be defiled, and then acted as if she was willing to go through fire and water to die a heroic death. What are you thinking about? It's just an experiment. Wuming turned his head and looked helplessly at Azriel, who was possessed by a drama queen, and complained. Experiment meow? Azriel was puzzled. Although she had been acting just now, Azriel's puzzled expression was real. She was puzzled by Wuming's experiment. However, although she did not understand or know what the experiment was, Azriel still obediently followed Wuming to a corner. Are you ready, Azriel? Wuming pretended to be serious as he looked at Azriel. I'm ready, meow. Azriel said nervously. It could not be helped. Who asked Wuming to be so serious? Then, Wuming began to chant. The one who has the supreme divine power, the god protects him, the devil hates him, no enemy can get close to him, like a fountain of vitality that is constantly surging, grant the world equal protection. After Wuming finished chanting, his body began to glow. Then, Wuming put his palm on Azriel's head. With Azriel's current height, Wuming could just touch Azriel's small head when he raised his hand. In an instant, the light on Wuming's body passed through Wuming's arm on Azriel's head. Immediately afterward, countless elves gathered, creating a strong whirlwind. Azriel and Wuming were like the eye of the storm, attracting countless elves with them as the center. Azriel was growing a little bit bigger, but the speed was very slow. After seeing the effect, Wuming increased the output of vitality incarnation. Then, in just a few breaths, Azriel grew back to her original state. In short, Azriel recovered from the state of a 10-year-old child to the state of a 16-year-old girl. Sure enough, vitality incarnation was also useful for the Skywing race, Wuming said in his heart. Immediately afterward, Wuming put down his hand on Azriel's head, and then said to Azriel, "Check if you have recovered, Azriel." Azriel reacted instantly, and began to feel her physical condition. Azriel was stunned from the beginning. If it weren't for Wuming's words, it would have taken her a while to recover. Meow? I've actually fully recovered, meow? Azriel shouted excitedly after feeling the state of her body. My lord, thank you very much, meow. Azriel knelt on one knee to Wuming. Wuming smiled. After all, as the eldest sister, you can't do anything without recovering your strength. The reason why Azriel followed Wuming was that she didn't want to enter the recovery device herself. She wanted to give the few places to enter the recovery device for recovery to the other sisters. Power is used to protect. Only by mastering power can you protect the people you want to protect. Wuming's words reminded Azriel of Arthas. Her Skywing race failed to protect Arthas. Then, Azriel looked at Wuming. Although Sir Arthas's death is related to Sir Wuming, Sir Arthas did not blame you. Instead, he entrusted us to Sir Wuming. Therefore, I persuaded the sisters who opposed and led the Skywing race to find Sir Wuming. Azriel got rid of her habit of speaking. When Azriel said this, Wuming understood. Turned out that Azriel had done some brainwashing on the Skywing race. Thinking about it, it made sense. How could they so easily submit to their master's enemy, even if it was the original master's order? However, I don't know if it's because Sir Arthas's status is too high, or if it's because I've been bound by the idea of the strong being respected, but I don't feel too much about Sir Arthas's death, nor am I too hostile toward Sir Wuming. What I'm thinking about is the future of my sisters. That was why Azriel had brought the Skywing race to Wuming so quickly. Wuming did not say anything, nor did he interrupt Azriel. He just listened quietly. I've thought about it before. Someone who was entrusted by Sir Arthas can't be too bad. Now that I think about it, it's not unreasonable for Sir Wuming to be able to defeat Sir Arthas. Azriel then smiled sweetly at Wuming. Protecting the thoughts of others. Is that why Sir Wuming is so powerful? I'll remember that. In the future, I'll also protect you. In order to make up for the regret of not being able to protect Sir Arthas, in order to protect Sir Arthas's final order, in order to protect my sisters, and even more so to protect my dearest master. After Azriel finished speaking, one of the 12 stone plates in Wuming's heart automatically lit up. In an instant, Azrael's eye of the sword, which represented death, began to change. The sword became wider, and it became similar to a shield, which represented protection. Protect me! Wuming really did not think that there would be a day when he would need protection. If that day came, the enemy would not be someone that Azrael could deal with. However, it was her intention. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm waiting for that day. Chapter 456. After coming out of the corner with Azrael, the other Skywings looked curiously at Soundless and Azrael, who had recovered her body. After all, Azrael was still in her infant state. In just a few minutes, Azrael had returned to her original state. Not only that, but Azrael's aura had also become different from before. This could not help but make people. No, it made the Skywings curious. In addition, the gathering of elves and the whirlwind in the corner had also attracted the attention of the Skywings. They were eager to know what had happened. Wuming helplessly looked at the dozens of pairs of wolf-like eyes. I think the Skywings are not thirsting for knowledge, but for the unknown. When they all recover, I must give the order for all of them to learn and collect knowledge. Aren't you all interested in the unknown? Do you know the saying, "There's no end to learning"? Go and learn. Ahem. Lord Wuming has something important to say. Hurry up and call the others over. Tell everyone that the Skywings in the recovery device should also go and help, Meowm, because the recovery device was limited. Except for the Skywings who had entered the recovery device and the dozens of Skywings who had stayed behind, the other Skywings returned to their rooms. By the way, the Skywings' rooms did not have doors or windows, and they could only be entered through the Skywings' innate spatial ability. Although they had entered the weak state of a 10-year-old child, the Skywings could still use their spatial ability to enter and exit their homes, although it was very strenuous. Afterward, the Skywings who had stayed behind and the ones in the recovery device left to call for others. The reason for this situation was because of Azrael's suggestion. First, let's talk about the change in Azrael's eyes. Originally, the Skywings' eyes had a sword-like pupil. Now, Azrael's pupil had turned into a shield. This was not entirely accurate. It should be a pupil that was both sword-like and shield-like. To put it simply, it should be similar to a broad-bladed sword. It was the kind of door that could be used as both a sword and a shield. A broad-bladed sword. The reason for that was because of Wuming's avatar, Dependent. When Azrael really wanted to submit to Wuming, she happened to have Wuming's magical power in her body, which triggered the ability of Dependent. Now, Azrael had truly become Wuming's subordinate. Moreover, she had signed a contract and formed a connection with him. Wuming could summon Azrael to help him at any time. In a sense, it was the same as Athena, Guinevere, and Lancelot in the Godslayer world. However, it was more troublesome to summon Athena and the other subordinate deities, while the connection between Azrael and Wuming was brought by the Dependent, so Wuming only needed to use the Dependent avatar to summon Azrael, which was much more convenient than summoning Athena and the others. Azrael also noticed that she had a connection with Wuming, but because she wanted to be loyal to Wuming, Azrael did not mind at all. Then, Azrael proposed that all the Skywings should sign a contract with Wuming. Wuming was a little reluctant. After all, not all the other Skywings would be willing. The only belief of the Skywings was Arthas, and Wuming did not explain much about Arthas' spirit marrow, so in the Skywings' hearts, Wuming was the murderer of Arthas. The Skywings would follow Wuming nominally, but if they really signed a master-slave contract, Wuming judged that not too many Skywings would accept it. Anyway, that was what Wuming thought, but he could not resist Azrael's half-instigation and half-coercion. Azrael told Wuming that even if he could not form a contract with all of them, he could at least form a contract with some of them. Lord Wuming, you're not that bad in the eyes of the Skywings, Meow. Besides, you're underestimating the Skywings too much, Meow. These were Azrael's exact words. Afterward, Wuming and Azrael came together. Of course, it was also necessary to help the Skywing breeds recover. After all, Silent Wonder had agreed to Arthur's request. Now that the Skywing breeds were his kin, he had to treat them better. The Skywings were created god-slaying weapons, so they had strict rules when it came to discipline. Even though there were nearly 10,000 of them, the Skywings quickly gathered. Not long after, all the Skywings were in front of Wuming. Because there was not much space on Abondiheim's body, the ground, the air, and the trees were filled with Skywings. They were all waiting for Wuming to speak. Wuming glanced at Azrael, and she bowed to Wuming before retreating behind him. I've gathered everyone here mainly to recover your bodies. Azrael is an example. My authority can have a recovery effect on your bodies, so I wish to recover all of you in one go. The moment Wuming said this, almost all the Skywings were stunned. Even their original master, Arthas, could not recover all of them in one go. Also, Azrael has already established a contract with me, so I can summon her at any time. This is also my authority, but Azrael is completely willing. With that said, everyone turned to look at Azrael. Azrael nodded, indicating that she was willing to do so. It would be bad if the Skywings mistakenly believed that Wuming was forcing Azrael. Arthas didn't tell you, so you might not know. I'm a god from another world, and I might need helpers from time to time. After all, there might not be any more wars in this world, so I wish to sign a contract with all of you. However, this won't be forced. Those who aren't willing can leave now. In a while, I will restore the bodies of those who aren't willing, and for those who are willing, I will establish a contract when I restore your bodies. With that, Wuming waited for the Skywings to move. The reason there would not be any more wars was that Wuming had decided to find a god that could replace him as the only god and forbid war in this world. This could be considered as taking care of the humans a little. After Wuming finished speaking, he realized that not a single Skywing moved. Wuming frowned as he looked at the Skywings. Thinking that he had not made himself clear, Wuming spoke again. Did I not make myself clear? Those who aren't willing can leave. My lord, we are willing. Nearly 10,000 Skywings said in unison. With nearly 10,000 mouths speaking at the same time, Wuming was given a fright. That's why I said, Lord Wuming, don't underestimate us Skywings, meow. Azrael looked at Wuming gloatingly and said, we won't disobey Lord Wuming's final order. Even if we do, we'll submit because of Lord Wuming's order, meow. I'll give you the right to challenge me. Live on and work hard to become stronger. Don't you have almost unlimited lifespans? Then, make killing me with your own hands your lifelong goal. This was Wuming's order. We can't follow you to another world, so we can't fulfill this order. What if you don't come back, Lord Wuming? Azrael was like a fox that had just eaten grapes, smiling at Wuming. Azrael was right. After all, Wuming was not a native of this world. Wuming had his own world, and he needed to go back. Although he would return to this world, he would not be able to do so many times. Besides, there are plenty of Skywings who have submitted to your spirit, meow. The Skywings were not idiot. Wuming had given them motivation and a goal to live on. At the start, many of the Skywings could tell. Now that they had calmed down, they more or less understood Wuming's words. With a series of reasons such as, I'll definitely fulfill this order, thank you for giving us a new goal to live on, and Lord Wuming's words must be obeyed, the Skywings completely accepted Wuming's contract. Wuming smiled. That guy Artrius really has a bunch of awesome children. Even I'm a little jealous. Then, let's begin. Restore your bodies and contract. With that, Wuming raised his hand. Wait a moment. At this moment, an extremely pleasant voice was heard. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.